Chapter 1279. I will show you how powerful I am, Z said coldly. Z said coldly. His words became erratic, as if in an instant they came from all directions and were everywhere. His figure flashed, and in front of Chu Mu's eyes, illusionary afterimages appeared one after another. It was hard to tell which one was real and which one was fake. Illusory afterimages circled around from all directions. Each of the illusory afterimages contained a chilling sword light. As they flickered, they carried a sharp killing intent. It's the law of illusion, someone said in shock. The law of illusion was a type of law of heaven and earth. It was a rare law and it wasn't easy to comprehend. Once Ziyi's law of illusion was unleashed, countless illusions appeared and it was hard to tell which was the real one. There were countless sharp sword light and each of them seemed to be real and fake at the same time. However, Chu Mu didn't dare to underestimate the murderous intent. It was hard to tell with the naked eye. Even when he used his spiritual sense, it was also blocked. This shocked Chu Mu. The law of illusion was indeed powerful. Ziyi's law of illusion had indeed reached a very high level. You are no match for me. Ziyi's voice sounded and merged with the law of illusion. It made his voice even more erratic and illusory. It was as if he was everywhere and there was nothing he couldn't hear. His vision was disrupted, and even his mental strength was disrupted. Chu Mu simply closed his eyes. The world in front of him was shrouded in darkness and disappeared. He actually closed his eyes. What is he going to do? Many geniuses were puzzled when they saw Chu Mu closing his eyes. Even if they were geniuses, their eyes were extremely useful in a battle. Without their eyes, unless they had undergone special training, their strength would be greatly affected. Gu Luankong's expression turned serious. His half-lying body sat up a little, and an interested expression appeared on his face. It was as if he wanted to see how Ziyi, who had his eyes closed, would deal with Ziyi's law of illusion. They didn't know about the existence of sword masters. Naturally, they didn't know about the 5 realms of sword skills. Looking at the sword made Chu Mu's eyes even sharper. Listening to the sword fully unearthed the potential of his ears. Touching the sword raised the perception of his skin to the extreme. As for the last sword intent, it was extremely mysterious. At present, Chu Mu still had no clue how to get started. However, to deal with Ziyi's illusion law, the combination of listening to the sword and touching the sword was enough. The law of illusion, it was still the law of illusion. Although Ziyi's law of illusion was profound, it had yet to reach the level of being able to freely change between illusion and reality. Therefore, when Chu Mu closed his eyes, the world before his eyes disappeared, and all the movements in the wind and grass appeared even more clearly in his ears. The world that he heard with his ears seemed to be clearer. The world that he felt with his skin and hair seemed to be more real. In the eyes of others, Ziyi had many illusions, and it was difficult to distinguish the real one. However, under Chu Mu's listening to the sword light and touching the sword, Ziyi's illusions disappeared one by one. In the end, only the real one was left. It flew towards Chu Mu in a strange and twisted path. The sword light was faintly discernible. It seemed to be illusory but also real. The sword light flickered but was extremely sharp. A sinister smile flashed across Ziyi's face. His sword was about to pierce Chu Mu's heart from the back. Soon, Ziyi's grin froze on his face. His face was filled with astonishment. The sword that he thought would definitely kill had been blocked. The tip of his sword had pierced into the spine of one of the swords. Immediately after, the spine of the sword trembled. It was like a dragon rising and falling. A tyrannical vibrating force burst forth, causing Ziyi's sword to bend. The powerful vibrating force hit his palm and went straight to his arm, causing him to feel numb. At the same time, the sword in front of him turned into a tyrannical sword light. It was as if it could cut a mountain. Ziyi's face instantly changed and he hurriedly retreated. After avoiding Chu Mu's counterattack, Ziyi immediately launched an attack. As someone who could be ranked in the top 20, his talent and strength were extraordinary. If he hadn't encountered the spatial barrier set up by Gulwankong, he might not have been ranked higher than 20. This was a powerful opponent. Chumu didn't underestimate Ze. He also didn't dare to underestimate Ze. Facing Ze, Chumu brought out his true strength. After crossing the Black Water Lake, when Chumu counterattacked or interfered with his opponent, he basically used the Law of Lightning. His Law of Lightning had reached the pinnacle of the minute subtlety realm, and he had used it many times. Moreover, after seeing how the other geniuses used the Law of Lightning, his mind was more open and he could use it more freely. The Law of Illusion was soundless and unpredictable, while the Law of Thunder was vast and mighty. The two sword techniques slashed at each other. It was a battle of basic sword techniques and a battle of middle heaven-level sword technique. The heaven-level sword technique that Ze cultivated was mainly based on the Law of Illusion. It was called the Great Illusion Sword Technique. Once the Great Illusion Sword Technique was executed, countless Great Illusion Sword Chi shot out. Each of the sword Chi had an illusory and hazy feeling, floating and unpredictable. It filled the surrounding air, causing the space to become somewhat illusory, as if it wasn't real. The Great Illusion Sword Chi wasn't strong directly. Its strength lay in the illusion. It contained the law of illusion and could cause illusions and disturb one's mind. When the first move of the Great Illusion Sword Technique was executed, the sword light exploded. The world around Chu Mu suddenly changed, turning into a world filled with the fragrance of flowers and the chirping of birds. The scenery was so beautiful that it made people forget to leave. They were immersed in it and couldn't extricate themselves. It was as if they felt that such a beautiful scenery should be lived like this until the end of the world. As soon as this thought arose, Chu Mu felt that something was wrong. This kind of feeling would make one lose the will to progress and be immersed in the beautiful scenery. It would wear down one's mind and will, and eventually make one a cripple. Sword intent erupted and the illusion was shattered. Chu Mu executed the Thunder Prison Break and made a powerful counterattack. Lightning surged in the sky and flames burned. The land was scorched for thousands of miles and smoke filled the air. Chu Mu's cultivation had reached the peak of the first sky of Nirvana realm. All kinds of forces of heaven and earth had also reached the peak of minute subtlety. The power of the Thunder Prison Break was extremely strong. The powerful counterattack made Ze's expression change drastically. It was as if he was struck by lightning as he continuously waved his sword to defend. Chu Mu's counterattack was too fast and fierce. Ze was slightly injured in an instant. "You actually injured me." Ze seemed to be enraged when he was injured. His face became cold and his eyes suddenly emitted a rich purple light, becoming even more demonic. Ze was enraged. He wanted to use his full strength. His eyes caused Chu Mu to be wary. Ze is finally going to show his true strength. A genius who knew Ze better laugh. It turned out that Ze's previous battle with Chu Mu was not his true strength. The purple light in Ze's eyes became even brighter. It was like a sword that was about to shoot out. In the next moment, Ze's eyes seemed to bulge out. Two dreamy purple lights flew out and pierced through the void. The speed was extremely fast and exceeded Chu Mu's reaction speed. In an instant, two purple rays of light entered Chu Mu's eyes, straight into his mental world. Chu Mu activated his sword intent and other attacks, but he discovered that his sword intent and other powers were useless. The two purple rays of light were like smoke, illusory and illusory. He simply couldn't touch them. Ze's eyes were innate. They were called the purple light demonic eyes and contained a mysterious power. When the purple light entered the spiritual world, it began to create illusions. Chu Mu did not even feel the slightest bit of it. He was suddenly placed in a perfect world. It was an extremely beautiful scenery. The mountains were clear, the water was clear, and hundreds of flowers were everywhere. There were also beauties in muslin dresses dancing among the flowers. They were like fairies and full of temptation. Everything was so natural that it made people think that it was real, and they believed that it was real. Chu Mu admired it like this and felt extremely comfortable. It was pleasing to the eye, causing him to linger on. This was even more brilliant than the great illusion sword technique Zi had used before. In the outside world, Ziyi's sword pierced out. The purple sword light was dreamy and blurred, but it also contained a terrifying sharpness. It tore through everything, penetrated everything, and was indestructible. It wanted to assassinate Chu Mu with this sword. The few divine princes became nervous. In the face of Ziyi's sword, Chu Mu did not move at all. It was as if he had become a statue. Chu Mu did not care about what was happening in the outside world. His mind was still immersed in the beautiful scenery and beauties. It is indeed beautiful, but it's all fake. In the illusory world, time could be long or short. It could be 1,000 years in a breath, or 1,000 years in a breath. In the beginning, Chu Mu was indeed confused and wanted to stay here until eternity. However, his soul was stronger than others, and his sword intent had also reached the peak of the divine realm. His resistance to illusions was very strong. After the interference of the great illusion sword technique, he had a certain degree of adaptability and could react. The illusory world in front of him was collapsing and disintegrating. The regret in Chu Mu's eyes disappeared and was replaced by a trace of coldness. When he opened his eyes, a demonic purple sword light arrived in an instant. It was already close to his forehead, as if it wanted to pierce through Chu Mu's forehead and crush his brain. This sword light was too fast. Chu Mu was pierced through from his forehead to his brain. Many people revealed a look of pity in their eyes. However, Gu Luankong's eyes emitted a sharp light, as if he was surprised. He even sat up. This kind of reaction was different from the others. Chu Mu's figure shattered and disappeared under the demonic purple sword light. He reappeared not far away. Ziyi's sure kill attack missed. His face was filled with astonishment. For a moment, he thought that he had killed Chu Mu, but he didn't expect that his attack would miss. Chu Mu dodged it. How did he dodge? Ziyi was very surprised. He only felt a trace of strange energy fluctuation flash by, and Chu Mu dodged it. He even grasped the power of space law. Gu Luankong's body leaned back on the chair, and he became lazy again. Chapter 1280. Gu Luankong was most proficient in the law of space. When he discovered that Chu Mu had also grasped the law of space and had even reached the peak of the minute subtlety, he was shocked and became even more interested in Chu Mu. The purple light demonic eye was Ziyi's innate ability. Anyone who was hit by it would fall into a beautiful illusion and be unable to extricate themselves. It was also because of the purple light demonic eye that he was able to study the law of illusion so deeply. The law of illusion and the purple light demonic eye were Ziyi's proudest abilities. He believed that even the monstrous geniuses sitting in the top 10 seats wouldn't be able to do anything against his purple light demonic eye. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to deal with Chu Mu. He didn't expect Chu Mu's soul power to be so much stronger than his. Even though the purple light demonic eye couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, Ziyi didn't give up. He used the great illusion sword art again to attack Chu Mu. However, most of his abilities were in the purple light demonic eye and were ineffective. His other abilities weren't as strong. However, this not as strong was relative. Compared to Chu Mu, Ziyi was slightly inferior. After an intense battle, Ziyi unleashed a rank 3 sword force. Chu Mu also used rank 3 sword force and slowly suppressed Ziyi. In the end, Ziyi was defeated. Ziyi's eyes were filled with unwillingness after being defeated. Chu Mu won and kept his seat. Ziyi lost and couldn't become a seat of honor. The next battle between the seats of honor soon began. When the 20th seat of honor issued a challenge, his name was Song Tianhua. His gaze slowly swept across the faces of the higher seats of honor, looking for an opponent. For example, since Chu Mu had already been challenged, he couldn't issue a challenge again. His gaze slowly moved towards the higher seats of honor and landed on the monstrous geniuses in the top 10 seats. Looking at Song Tianhua's gaze, it seemed like he wanted to challenge the top 10 monstrous geniuses. Until now, no one had issued a challenge to the top 10 monstrous geniuses. Everyone couldn't help but become excited. I want to challenge. Song Tianhua finally made his decision and slowly said, "The 8th seat of honor." "As you wish." The freak in the 8th seat was named Fong Tianqiong, and from the look on his face, he seemed a bit excited. After sitting there for so long, watching one intense battle after another, he was especially interested in the strength of some of the geniuses. His hands itched and he couldn't wait to make a move. Song Tianhua and Fong Tianqiong appeared in the middle, facing each other from a distance. The sky-piercing saint's sword was in their hands, and the sword's blade radiated a sharp light. Sword Qi vast sky. Song Tianhua and Fong Tianqiong made their moves without any probing attack. Instead, they directly used their most powerful sword move. Countless sword Qi shot out, whistling in all directions. The sky was dyed with a layer of red. It was not the red of blood, but the red of fire. The temperature of the air rose rapidly, as if it could melt steel into molten iron in a single breath. Fong Tianqiong had used this sword technique, and its power was astonishing. The sky seemed to be burning, and everything was about to be turned into ashes. Song Tianhua was shocked, and he hurriedly used a powerful sword technique. Snowflakes filled the sky, covering the sky and covering the earth. The temperature of the air dropped, and the cold and hot collided. Sizzling sounds could be heard, and countless white smoke spiraled into the air. Cold and hot, snowflakes and heavenly flames constantly collided. Everyone realized that Song Tianhua's strength was on par with Fong Tianqiong's. The intense battle was back and forth, and it was extremely intense. For a moment it was hard to tell who would win. Regardless of whether the two of them were using a basic sword technique or a heaven-rank sword technique, they were all extremely exquisite and powerful. Everyone was unable to take their eyes off them. Chu Mu was also staring the entire time, carefully analyzing and putting himself in their shoes. Gradually, the two seemed to be fighting for real. They used all kinds of abilities. Snowflakes filled the sky, and heavenly flames wreaked havoc. Each of them even activated a third-level sword force. Chu Mu realized that all these monstrous geniuses had grasped sword force. The lowest was at the 2nd level, and the most were at the 3rd level. As for whether they had reached the 4th level, Chu Mu felt that other than himself, there should be others who had grasped the 4th-level sword force. It was just that he hadn't seen them yet. Under the 3rd-level sword force, the power of the sword technique would increase by 4 times. Every sword seemed to be able to shatter the sky and crush the earth. Heavenly lightning, earthly flames, snowflakes, and frost were everywhere. The collision of power was shocking. If you only have this level of strength, you're going to lose. Song Tianhua's face was full of excitement as he said in high spirits. Then you're definitely going to lose. Fong Tianqiong smiled in response. She suddenly raised her hand, and Song Tianhua's eyebrows jumped. He had a bad feeling. A tyrannical power exploded from Fong Tianqiong's body. This power was filled with high temperature, as if it wanted to burn everything into ashes. That power was a faint red color. It spread out in an instant like a huge ball. In an instant it covered a radius of 1,000 meters. Song Tianhua couldn't dodge at all and was directly enveloped. This faint red ball released a shocking fluctuation of the rules of fire. Immediately afterward, within the pale red sphere, a raging fire appeared out of thin air following Fong Tianqiong's thoughts. The flame was extremely hot, burning fiercely and surrounding the sphere. Song Tianhua's expression changed drastically as he felt the temperature around him rise rapidly. The high temperature made his mouth dry up. Even after releasing the power of the rules of ice, it was difficult to resist. You've actually cultivated the fire force field. Song Tianhua was shocked. Every kind of power of heaven and earth had a corresponding force field that could be cultivated. A force field was actually a unique power that could be activated when one's mastery of the power of heaven and earth reached a certain level. It just required a corresponding method. With a cultivation force field, once it was released, it could form a suppression of the power of heaven and earth against an opponent who didn't have a force field. Just like now, when Fang Tianxiong released her fire force field, it immediately suppressed Song Tianhua. Song Tianhua's strength didn't surpass Fang Tianxiong's. At most, they were on par. Song Tianhua's rules of ice had only reached the peak of the minute subtlety. He hadn't broken through to the minute subtlety level, which was very difficult. At their age, there were very few people who could reach the minute subtlety level of mastery of the rules of heaven and earth. Fang Tianxiong happened to be one of them. As soon as the fire force field was released, Song Tianhua's strongest ice force field was immediately suppressed. His snow force field was also clearly suppressed. Song Tianhua's strength was clearly reduced. After Fang Tianxiong released the fire force field, her fire force field had clearly increased in power. Song Tianhua was suddenly at a disadvantage. After another round of battle, Song Tianhua tried his best, but he was still suppressed by Fang Tianxiong. Fang Tianxiong's advantage was obvious. In the end, Song Tianhua was defeated. The next battle was the challenge of the genius from the 19th seat. His opponent was the genius from the 9th seat. An intense battle ensued, similar to the battle between Song Tianhua and Fang Tianxiong. Both sides were evenly matched, but in the end, the genius from the 9th seat of the high nobility used his force field. As soon as his force field appeared, he immediately suppressed his opponent and increased his own strength. After a while, the gap between their strengths became obvious. The genius from the 9th seat of the high nobility defeated the genius from the 19th seat of the high nobility. The next battle was the turn of the genius from the 18th seat. The genius from the 18th seat was Chu Mu. Among the crowd, Chu Mu was undoubtedly the most eye-catching one. The attention he received was no less than the top 10 geniuses. This was because Chu Mu's performance in the Azure Sky illusory world had left a deep impression on everyone. Who will he choose as his opponent? Many people were guessing. The demons in the top 10 seats also looked at Chu Mu with expectant gazes. Yang Zhantian and Lien Hongyun's eyes carried traces of fighting intent. Defeating Chu Mu would give them a greater sense of achievement. Su Yueshi looked at Chu Mu provocatively. This kind of gaze was very tempting. However, Chu Mu wasn't tempted. He was thinking calmly. Qin Aoxian's indifferent and cold eyes paused on Chu Mu's face for a while before moving away. Gu Luankong's eyes narrowed slightly and landed on Chu Mu's face. I forfeit. Chu Mu's gaze swept across everyone's faces. Then, he said something that shocked everyone. Are you sure? Great Emperor Su asked. Everyone only has 3 chances to challenge. Forfeiting means losing 1 chance. There are only 2 chances left. I'm sure. Chu Mu replied with certainty. All right, the 18th seat forfeits. The 17th seat will choose their opponent. Great Emperor Su said. He didn't interfere with Chu Mu's decision. Everyone was confused. However, Chu Mu had his own thoughts. He was in the 18th seat of the high nobility. The 17th to 11th seats of the high nobility had already been challenged, so he no longer had the chance to challenge them. Now that the 8th and 9th seats of the high nobility had been challenged, he could only challenge the 1st to 7th and 10th seats of the high nobility. After witnessing the strength of the 8th and 9th seat, Chu Mu wasn't confident that he could defeat them. This was because the force field was very strong. Moreover, the top 10 geniuses were all at least in the middle stage of the 3rd sky of the Nirvana realm. Their cultivation was profound and they could control the force field. They weren't easy to deal with. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that after the battle with Ze, Chu Mu's cultivation had reached the peak of the first sky of the Nirvana realm. He had completely consolidated it. He could feel the opportunity for a breakthrough. If he forcefully suppressed this opportunity, it wouldn't be so easy the next time. Therefore, he forfeited. He wanted to make a breakthrough here. He wanted to make a breakthrough in both cultivation and body at the same time to reach the second sky of the Nirvana realm. The early stage of the second sky of the Nirvana realm and the peak of the first sky of the Nirvana realm were only separated by a fine line. However, the difference in strength was very obvious. If Chu Mu could successfully make a breakthrough, his strength would definitely increase by a lot. At that time, he would be more confident in facing the top 10 geniuses. Chapter 1281. The 17th seat of honor challenged the 10th seat of honor, Tsuyueshi. As soon as Tsuyueshi stepped onto the stage, she immediately unleashed her terrifying strength. She released a dark force field that enveloped the entire area. The 17th High Priest's law of heaven and earth was instantly suppressed. He wasn't Tsuyueshi's opponent at all. He was defeated by her attacks. Tsuyueshi's fighting style was extremely violent, with a hint of devilishness. It was as if people couldn't help but look at her. Her graceful figure, her cold and charming expression, her emotionless and ever-changing sword tip, it was unknown how many people were secretly moved by her. After defeating her opponent, Tsuyueshi's beautiful eyes seemed to pierce through time and space, landing on Chu Mu's face. When she met Chu Mu's gaze, it wasn't gentle, it was cold. Chu Mu couldn't help being speechless, but he didn't think too much about it because he was preparing. The 16th seat genius also issued a challenge. His opponent was Lien Hongyun. Before their fight even began, a powerful aura suddenly surged out of Chu Mu's body. Everyone, including the 3 great sovereigns, was attracted by it. The battle didn't start. The 3 great emperors all showed pensive expressions before coming to a realization. They immediately understood why Chu Mu had given up on the challenge and missed the opportunity. The reason was because of this. The opportunity to break through had arrived. If he forcefully suppressed it, it wouldn't be so easy for him to break through next time. Breaking through depended on an opportunity. If one didn't have the opportunity to break through forcefully, it would be easy to get into trouble. If the opportunity was there, it would be a matter of course. However, if one forcefully suppressed the breakthrough, they would lose an opportunity. Who knew when the next opportunity would come? It might be soon, or it might be very slow. Chu Mu urgently needed strength. Therefore, even if he lost a chance to challenge someone, he had to increase his strength as quickly as possible without any repercussions. Actually, there were 3 chances to challenge someone, but that was for those who weren't confident. For those who were confident, 1 chance was enough. If you couldn't, then you couldn't. If you weren't strong enough, then no matter how many chances you had, it would be useless. Chu Mu wanted to break through, causing quite a commotion. Everyone was paying attention to him. Our battle will be held later. Lien Hongyun spoke to her opponent with a smile on her face and a casual tone. However, there was a hint of unwillingness in her tone. On the 18th throne, Chu Mu's body surged with an incomparably tyrannical power. That power came from the deepest part of his body and was unstoppable. Chu Mu's body began to shatter from his 5 viscera and 6 bowels. Chu Mu could clearly feel his body shattering. From the inside to the outside, everything turned into flesh and blood. Large amounts of nirvana chi continuously scoured Chu Mu's flesh and blood, scouring and cleansing over and over again, causing the impurities in Chu Mu's flesh and blood to become increasingly pure. This should be a rather terrifying scene. A living person had turned into a pile of flesh and blood. However, the surroundings were shrouded in light, making it look a little blurry. Moreover, the nirvana chi was shuttling through the flesh and blood, so it didn't look bloody. Breaking through to the nirvana realm was not that simple. Normally, it would take a long time, at least 2 or 3 days. First, the nirvana chi was used to refine the flesh and blood, which required a certain amount of time. After the refinement of the flesh and blood, the reconstruction of the body required even more time. Luckily, everyone wasn't lacking in time. Hence, they weren't in a hurry. Instead, they calmly watched Chu Mu's breakthrough. After about a day, Chu Mu's flesh and blood finally reached its limit under the continuous cleansing of the nirvana chi. At this moment, the reconstruction of the body was about to begin. Whistling sounds could be heard, and countless gusts of wind blew in from all directions. The wind and clouds in the sky changed, gathering above the 100 godly mountains. Everyone on the other side of the lake could see this change, and they were all astonished. What's happening? Such a huge commotion, what's going on? Apart from being stunned, everyone was extremely puzzled. Their eyes were wide open as they stared at the sky above the 100 sacred mountains. The wind and clouds changed. Countless white clouds moved with the wind and moved towards the top of the 100 Gods mountain. The top of the 100 Gods mountain became the center and focal point. Countless white clouds gathered and slowly rotated. The chi of heaven and earth also moved with the wind from all directions, turning into white airflows that could be seen by the naked eye. The celestial sword star was originally an ancient planet of life. It was a super planet of life. The chi of heaven and earth on it was not only very rich but also very pure. It was a planet of life that was very suitable for cultivation. However, on this planet of life, there weren't as many swordsmen as on other super planets of life. This was because it was under the control of the heavenly sword hall. When swordsmen cultivated, they had to absorb the chi of heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth was produced by the planet of life. The larger the planet of life, the richer and purer the chi of heaven and earth. However, when there were many people cultivating, under the continuous absorption, the chi of heaven and earth would be affected after a long period of time. As an ancient superplanet of life, the celestial sword star had its unique symbolic meaning. Therefore, it had to be protected. Most of the people who lived on the celestial sword star were ordinary people. Some of them didn't have high cultivation, while some had extremely high cultivation. For example, there were a few great emperors guarding the celestial sword star. The cultivation of the great emperors had reached the level where they didn't need to absorb the chi of heaven and earth from the planet of life. It wouldn't affect the planet of life. The chi of heaven and earth was pure and rich. It was also very helpful for Chu Mu's breakthrough. A cloud of chi of heaven and earth started to gather in the sky above the 100 sacred mountains. Everyone's attention was immediately attracted to it. The moment the cloud of chi of heaven and earth appeared, it immediately reached 4 miles. It reached 4 miles the moment it gathered. Not bad. Great Emperor Bo-Su and the other two looked and nodded. The whistling sound continued. Streaks of chi of heaven and earth gathered. They were at least as thick as a muscular man's waist. In the sky above, it was like a roaring dragon. It was as if 10,000 dragons had been summoned. The chi of heaven and earth within 4 miles expanded rapidly. The speed was extremely fast. Soon, it reached 5 miles. It expanded rapidly to 6 miles and then 7 miles. That's chi of heaven and earth. Is someone breaking through? Everyone who was watching from afar finally reacted. This scene was very similar to when a Nirvana realm cultivator was breaking through. Isn't the Seat of Honor challenge ongoing? Why is someone breaking through? Soon, the chi of heaven and earth above the 100 sacred mountains expanded to 9 miles. 9 miles wasn't bad, but no one was shocked. This was expected. If it wasn't 9 miles, they would suspect that Chu Mu's ranking in the Sky Azure ethereal world was fake. Among the 100 monstrous geniuses present, the chi of heaven and earth could reach 9 miles when they broke through to the Nirvana realm. For example, Guan Lin's chi of heaven and earth was less than 9 miles. Of course, it didn't mean that the bigger the chi of heaven and earth, the higher the Seat of Honor ranking. Some geniuses who were ranked below Guan Lin might have a qi of heaven and earth that surpassed Guan Lin. The size of the qi of heaven and earth represented one's potential and future achievements. 8 miles and 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth might be different. After all, one's future achievements didn't only depend on one's talent and potential. It was also related to external factors. Of course, the bigger the qi of heaven and earth, the greater the potential, which was always a good thing. Then, a shocking scene appeared. After the qi of heaven and earth reached 9 miles, it didn't stop. Instead, it continued to absorb the rich qi of heaven and earth. The qi of heaven and earth seemed to transform into a roaring flood dragon that constantly poured into the qi of heaven and earth, causing the qi of heaven and earth to continue expanding. 9 miles, 9 miles, 9 miles, 9 miles. Every time the qi of heaven and earth expanded, it represented Chu Mu's potential. Soon, the qi of heaven and earth above Chu Mu's qi of heaven and earth reached 7 miles. Among the 100 monstrous geniuses present, there were 30 or 40 who could reach 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth. However, only the top 10 monstrous geniuses were able to reach 7 miles of qi of heaven and earth. The potential that Chu Mu had displayed now was enough to convince people. He was indeed comparable to the top 10 monstrous geniuses. The qi of heaven and earth once again expanded, reaching 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth. This caused another shock, because there were only 3 people who could reach 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth. Can it reach 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth? Someone couldn't help but have this thought. 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth was the limit. Since ancient times there were very few people who could reach it. Among the people present, only Gu Luankong's qi of heaven and earth reached 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth when he broke through. Therefore, Gu Luankong was looking forward to it. The qi of heaven and earth above the 100 sacred mountains was still expanding bit by bit. 9 miles of qi, 9 miles of qi. He has reached the limit. I have witnessed a miracle. A super monstrous genius has been born. The ninely 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 Gu Luankong sat up straight again. His eyes were wide open, shooting out a bright light. Traces of battle intent rose from his body, but quickly disappeared. This wasn't the end. The first qi of heaven and earth reached 9 miles of qi of heaven and earth, which was the limit, and a new qi of heaven and earth appeared beside it. When one broke through to the first sky of Nirvana realm, 1 qi of heaven and earth appeared. When one broke through to the second sky of Nirvana realm, 2 qi of heaven and earth appeared. When the first qi of heaven and earth reached the limit, the second qi of heaven and earth would appear and grow to the limit of the first qi of heaven and earth. When the second qi of heaven and earth appeared, it started from the beginning and rapidly increased to 1 mile. In the blink of an eye, it reached 2 miles, then 3 miles, then 4 miles. The speed of growth slowed down when it reached 4 miles, but it was still very fast. Tens of thousands of qi of heaven and earth dragons came from all directions as if they were worshipping the Dragon King. Whistling sounds echoed in all directions, as if the heavens and earth were shaking. This vast momentum shocked countless people. When the people in the distance saw the huge qi of heaven and earth, they were all stunned. Chapter 1282. The 9 yuan qi clouds, 2 of which were arranged in a straight line, floated above the 100 divine mountains. They slowly rotated, covering an area of 10 li close to 20 li. They emitted an incomparably dense heaven and earth yuan qi fluctuation, causing people's hearts to tremble. Both of his origin qi clouds have reached 9 miles. How terrifying! He is a super monster. It seems like he is about to break through to the second sky of Nirvana realm. Among the 100 monstrous geniuses participating in the Supreme Seat Challenge, there aren't many who are only at the peak of the first sky of Nirvana realm. There should only be one who can reach 9 miles 9 cloud. That's right, I think so too. In summary, I think everyone should know this person's name. It was unknown who was the first to say the two words, Chu-mu. In an instant, it was as if a huge storm had swept out. Everyone knew about it. In a short period of time, it had spread throughout the entire Divine Sword planet. Furthermore, the news had spread beyond the Divine Sword planet. It had swept through the entire galaxy, then spread to other galaxies, and then to other galaxies. The speed at which the news spread was simply too astonishing. So powerful. His origin energy cloud has actually reached 9 miles and 9 miles. It's hard to imagine. I already knew that Chu-mu was extraordinary, but I didn't expect him to exceed my expectations. Isn't it just a 9 yuan chi cloud? It's not like no one has ever achieved it before. What's there to be proud of? This was undisguised jealousy. Regardless of whether it was envy, admiration, worship, or jealousy, Chu-mu's breakthrough on the 100 sacred mountains had shaken the entire galaxy. The people of the 5 elements sword sect felt very proud. The Heavenly Sword Hall, especially the main Divine Hall, also felt very proud. This kid. Great Emperor Bo-Su looked at the huge Yuan Chi cloud in the sky and couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. You have a good plan. The middle-aged Great Emperor laughed. Making a breakthrough in cultivation was not an easy matter. If someone forcefully interfered with the breakthrough, it was very likely that the breakthrough would fail. Therefore, the breakthrough would usually be done in a more secretive and safe place. The 100 Sacred Mountain was not a secret, but it was absolutely safe. This was because the 3 great emperors were here. They wouldn't allow Chu-mu to be disturbed. They would protect Chu-mu. No matter how secretive and safe a place was, it couldn't be compared to a place guarded by 3 great emperors. This was a great opportunity. Chu-mu naturally wouldn't let it go. Next, 2 clouds of Yuan Qi descended and nourished Chu-mu's flesh and blood, causing his flesh and blood to regenerate. However, there was no movement even after a long time, causing people to be puzzled. They did not understand what was going on. Great Monarch Bo-Su and the other 2 also raised their heads to look at the sky. They frowned slightly as they couldn't tell what was going on. Why was there a delay? Could it be that it's not over yet? A thought popped into his mind. Gulwankong was also confused. Then, as if he had thought of something, he came to a realization. As expected, Great Monarch Bo-Su and the other 2 suddenly raised their heads. Their gazes became deep and distant. It was as though they had seen through the 2 clouds of Yuan Qi and looked at the vast sky. They were looking at the starry sky beyond the sky. At that moment, there were some starships flying in the boundless starry sky outside the Holy Sword Star. Suddenly, there was a cry of surprise from the starships. It attracted everyone's attention and they gathered at the windows of the starships to look out. Beams of starlight came from nowhere and shot over from afar like meteors. It looked like a meteor shower. What's going on? Why are there so many starlights? Looking at the trajectory of the starlights, they seemed to be heading towards the Holy Sword Star. Could it be that a great emperor is cultivating? I don't think it's caused by a great emperor. The commotion caused by a great emperor is 1,000,000 times greater than this. If it's not caused by a great emperor, what's going on? Why are there so many starlights? Shock. Everyone who saw it felt extremely shocked. A large number of starlights shot across the boundless starry sky outside the Holy Sword Star. It was a spectacular sight from afar. Everyone was stunned. Countless starlights shot into the Holy Sword Star. Beams of light appeared in the sky above the Holy Sword Star. It was broad daylight. It was difficult to see the few beams of starlight as they were covered by the sun's rays. However, everyone saw it now. Not only did they see it, they were also attracted by it. There were too many starlights. There seemed to be an endless number of them. They flew over from all directions in the sky above the Holy Sword Star. Following the starlights, there seemed to be many more shining stars. Stars in daytime, one of them exclaimed. The appearance of stars in daytime was a rare phenomenon. They didn't expect that they would actually see it. Immediately, many people were very excited. It's stars in daytime. Great monarch Bosu and the other two were surprised. Many of the demonic geniuses were shocked too. It was rare to see such a vision. Among them, only Gu Luankong and Qin Aoxian had seen such a vision when they were breaking through. The others had not seen it before. The stars in daytime, the vision, made everyone pay more attention to Chu Mu. After the stars in daytime appeared, rays of starlight gathered from all directions and began to attack the two Yuan Qi clouds. The starlight seemed to have become a tide, surging violently. Under the impact of the starlight tide, the two Yuan Qi clouds shattered at the same time. As soon as the vital Qi clouds shattered, many people became nervous. However, there were also some who were gloating. Not everyone liked to see others doing well. However, they were soon disappointed. After the vital Qi clouds shattered, they did not dissipate. Instead, they merged with the tide of starlight. In the end, they turned into a huge nebula that was more than 40 miles wide. The nebula started to spin slowly like a whirlpool. What's going on? Why did the vital Qi clouds become like this? 40 miles. What's going on? The three great monarchs looked up at the sky with confusion in their eyes. What was going on with the 40 miles wide nebula whirlpool? They did not know that it was caused by Chu Mu's Qi cultivation and physique cultivation. Under normal circumstances, there would be a vital Qi cloud when one broke through to the nirvana realm in Qi cultivation. As for physique cultivation, most of them would be vital Qi clouds. Of course, compared to Qi cultivation, physique cultivation was much rarer. Those who cultivated Qi cultivation and physique cultivation at the same time were even rarer. After all, one's energy and time were limited. The astral calamity that Chu Mu cultivated in physique cultivation was actually an ancient and powerful cultivation technique that originated from the Age of Gods. It was no small matter. It was not impossible for it to cause the stars in daytime and starlight tide to appear. The 40 miles wide nebula whirlpool started to spin faster. It was like a huge millstone. 40 miles wide, it covered a part of the sky and covered the top of everyone. The nebula whirlpool spun faster and faster. In the end, a straight line extended from the center. It was like a comet that blasted towards Chu Mu's seat. In the blink of an eye, the nebula whirlpool came into contact with Chu Mu. It constantly poured into him, causing Chu Mu's flesh and blood to recombine. The first to recombine was his heart. The wood aspect source in his heart still existed and had not been destroyed. However, the wood aspect source was also absorbing the power of the nebula whirlpool and growing stronger. As the wood aspect source grew, its life force became even richer. When it was released, it also participated in the recombination of the heart. Immediately, new changes occurred in Chu Mu's heart. It became tougher, filled with more life force, and when it beat, it became stronger and more powerful. This life force was internal. It was rooted in the heart and fused together with it. It was not like before when the wood aspect source was strengthened from the outside. This was because the wood aspect source's life force had participated in the recombination of the heart, causing this change. After the heart was recombined, the wood aspect source continued to absorb the power of the nebula whirlpool. It also continued to release life force to help the other organs recombine. Just like the heart, the other organs were also filled with vigorous life force from the inside. Next, it was the recombination of the other parts, such as blood, bones, tendons, muscles, skin, etc. No matter which part was recombined, every part would be filled with vigorous life force. The life force went deep into the body and completely became a part of it. It was like the cells in the body. Or rather, the life force was injected into the cells. The body was recombining bit by bit. This was a slow process. Everyone was watching. Nirvana is very thorough. Great Emperor Lu Su said. The other two great emperors nodded in agreement. It was the same nirvana. Some nirvanas were complete, while others were incomplete. There was no difference between complete and incomplete nirvana at the beginning. However, as time went on, it would gradually affect one's potential. Simply put, during the first nirvana, the yuan qi cloud might be 9 miles. However, if it was incomplete, the second nirvana, the yuan qi cloud would probably be less than 9 miles. Chu Mu's nirvana this time was complete. It could be said to be perfect. This meant that during the next nirvana, his yuan qi cloud would still be 9 miles. This was a terrifying thing. What an incredible junior! One of the great emperors chuckled. Back then, we couldn't be compared to him. Great Emperor Lu Su exclaimed. Those who could become great emperors had extraordinary potential. They were far more talented than ordinary geniuses. However, even if they were talented, they couldn't say that they had a 100% chance of becoming a great emperor. Therefore, in the eyes of the great emperors, juniors were juniors. No matter how talented they were, as long as they couldn't become a great emperor, they would still be juniors. Now that great Emperor Lu Su was exclaiming, it meant that he recognized and appreciated Chu Mu's talent and potential. At this moment, the nebula vortex in the sky shrunk continuously. From 40 miles it shrunk to 10 miles, 9 miles, 8 miles, 7 miles. It shrunk continuously. In the end, when the vortex of nebula shrank to less than half a kilometer, it turned into a ball of light that slammed into the 18th throne. Intense light exploded out in all directions, and a figure appeared within it. Chapter 1283. With a flash of light, the inner armor on Chu Mu's body was put back on. The aura of the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm spread out from his body. Within this aura, there was vigorous vitality. Although the vitality was weak, it was very tough and tenacious. His cultivation had successfully broken through at the same time as his chi and physique cultivation. It triggered a vision. Stars appeared in the daytime, a tide of starlight, and the final recombination of his flesh and blood. The vitality of the wood aspect was integrated into every part of his body, causing the effect of Chu Mu's breakthrough to be extraordinary. In terms of chi cultivation, he was still at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. The quantity and quality of the divine wilderness sword essence had increased by several folds. However, such an increase was the same as other geniuses' breakthroughs. The most important thing was his physique cultivation. Physique cultivation was the same as chi cultivation. They were both at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. However, due to the integration of the vitality of the wood aspect during the recombination of the flesh and blood, there were different changes. The vitality contained in the flesh and blood was far superior to others. Even a high-level Nirvana realm swordsman would find it difficult to compare with Chu Mu. This meant that Chu Mu was not afraid of being injured. Once injured, even without the wood aspect, he could rely on the vitality contained in his flesh and blood to quickly recover. In a sense, he already possessed the characteristics of an immortal body. This was a good start. Chu Mu realized that the wood aspect of the spiritual world's law of wood was constantly flickering with light. It was being nourished by his body. It seemed like it was accumulating energy, preparing to break through to the minute subtlety. This was an excellent breakthrough. It allowed Chu Mu to sense the wood aspect of the heavens and earth more clearly. This breakthrough took 3.5 days to complete. Lien Hongyun and his opponent also stood in the middle for 3.5 days. "Alright, you can make your move." Lien Hongyun smiled at his opponent. Seeing Chu Mu break through, this genius had mixed feelings. After standing here for more than 3 days, his battle intent was surging. When he heard Lien Hongyun's words, he could not hold back anymore. He drew his sword and slashed out. The sword seemed to have slashed apart the sky, shattered the earth, and severed the mountains. It possessed a grand momentum and fully displayed his strength. Lien Hongyun wore a smile on her face. Her body drifted like a cloud in the sky. Soon after, A faint red color spread out from her body and covered the surroundings, directly enveloping her opponent. It was the fire force field again. As soon as the force field was activated, it immediately suppressed the opponent. At least 30% of his strength was suppressed, and the remaining 70% was obvious. He was no match for Lien Hongyun at all. Lien Hongyun didn't even need to use her full strength. She executed a few sword moves consecutively, and under the enhancement of the blazing fire force field, she quickly defeated her opponent. The monstrous geniuses in the top 10 were indeed no small matter. The genius on the 15th seat issued a challenge. His target was the monstrous genius ranked 4th, Bai Yu. Bai Yu's hair was a little gray, which made him look strange. His face was calm, almost indifferent. His eyes were black and white. At first glance, he looked no different from a normal person. But at second glance, he looked very strange. It was as if his pupils were abnormally black, so black that it made people's hearts palpitate. On the stage, Bai Yu didn't say a word. It was very strange. His opponent was stared at by Bai Yu's black and white eyes. For some reason, his opponent felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if Bai Yu's eyes could awaken the fear in one's heart. The sword intent moved, cutting away the fear in one's heart. His strength was stimulated. He drew his sword and displayed his sword skills. The atmosphere was majestic, like a mighty river. However, Bai Yu did not draw his sword. The black pupils in his eyes suddenly spun like a whirlpool or a black hole, sucking in everything. The black and white instantly became very distinct. Just looking at it made people's hair stand on end. Without a sound, the body of the person who was using the sword technique suddenly trembled. The sword light froze in midair. Immediately after, it moved again. However, the sword technique changed very quickly. There were many changes, but it seemed to be fighting with the air. Not only did it not attack Bai Yu, but it moved further and further away from Bai Yu, to the side. This scene gave people a very strange feeling. It was as if the opponent of that genius was a ghost. Thinking of this, many people felt strange. It was as if a chilly wind blew. It made their hair stand on end and goosebumps rise all over their bodies. Bai Yu still stood where he was without moving. He did not have any expression. He continuously displayed his sword skills, one move after another. His sword energy was also stimulated. He did not hold back at all as he attacked in all directions. However, he avoided Bai Yu. It looked even more strange. In the last move, no one knew if it was intentional or not. The sword slid across his own neck and he committed suicide. In this strange battle, Bai Yu won just like that. After that genius was reborn, he looked at Bai Yu with lingering fear. His face was pale, and there was a shadow in his heart. It made people sigh. If this genius could not walk out of the shadow, there would most likely be no Deshang in the future. However, they were very afraid of Bai Yu. He defeated his opponent without drawing blood. He even made his opponent commit suicide in the end. From the looks of it, they guessed that it was a soul-type attack. However, they did not know what was going on. They could only understand after experiencing it for themselves. However, after seeing such a strange scene, who would be willing to try it for themselves? Many people looked at Bai Yu with strange gazes. There was fear in their eyes. No matter what, up until now, aside from Chu Mu's breakthrough, Bai Yu left the deepest impression on everyone. The next person to be challenged was Yang Zhantian. As soon as he attacked, his battle intent soared. This battle intent was different from other people's battle intent. It was directly related to Yang Zhantian's cultivation technique, causing his battle intent to condense. Vaguely, that battle intent seemed to condense into an illusory battle god, floating above Yang Zhantian's head. A terrifying battle intent spread out, directly attracting the battle intent in everyone's heart. It made their blood boil. They really wanted to go up and fight. Yang Zhantian's opponent's battle intent was also stimulated. He directly attacked with his sword, launching a powerful attack. This person's style was somewhat similar to Yang Zhantian's. He walked the path of Yang Zhantian's overbearing style. With a sword in his hand, he moved in a straightforward manner, fully displaying the power of slashing. Every slash of his sword seemed capable of splitting mountains. "Fight!" Yang Zhantian roared. His battle-intent sword, soaring to the sky. His battle intent seemed to condense into clouds. He raised his sword, not dodging or evading. He directly slashed his sword forward. His momentum was like a falling meteor, wanting to sink the earth. This sword was too overbearing. It was indescribable. Nothing could stop it. Everything would be crushed under this sword. That was because this sword not only contained all kinds of power, but also battle intent. Battle intent was a kind of invisible power. Everyone had battle intent and they could also release it. However, it was limited to this. The application of battle intent was limited to the superficial level. However, Yang Zhantian's cultivation technique was different. He had studied the application of battle intent, and had constantly deepened it. He had turned battle intent into a kind of cultivation technique. It was like sword intent, which could be integrated into an attack, making the sword's attack even more tyrannical. With the integration of another kind of power, the power would be even more powerful. Yang Zhantian's formidable strength was directly related to the heaven-battling merit he cultivated. This sword strike was unblockable, capable of shattering everything. It was like a meteor crashing into the earth. Yang Zhantian's opponent's countenance drastically changed. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. He executed an even more powerful sword technique, causing the earth to crumble as he soared into the sky. The two swords collided, causing a terrifying explosion that threatened to tear Yang Zhantian apart. Yang Zhantian didn't retreat in the slightest, while his opponent was forced to retreat a few steps. Yang Zhantian raised his sword once again, and this time, his sword was even more ferocious than before. With a loud bang, the opponent was sent flying, coughing out blood as his body trembled violently. Yang Zhantian took a step forward, appearing above the opponent in a flash, and slashed down with his sword. Baiyu did not use any force field, nor did Yang Zhantian, but they displayed astonishing strength. They used strange and overbearing methods to crush their opponent. Next, they might see Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong make their move. Yang Zhantian, the genius in the third seat, was already so powerful. How powerful would the second and first seats be? The battles continued one after another. The genius in the 11th seat challenged the genius in the second seat. The genius in the second seat was Qin Aoxian. As soon as Qin Aoxian appeared, she immediately became the center of attention, the focus of everyone. She did not radiate with a powerful aura, only a kind of otherworldly coldness. She was like a fairy under the moonlight. Peerless beauty, Chu Mu said softly. Only he could hear his voice. Indeed, Qin Aoxian did look peerless at the moment. Qin Aoxian's opponent was a man. He used a pleasing gaze to study Qin Aoxian. Qin Aoxian's expression did not change in the face of his opponent's study. She remained cold and indifferent. If Su Yueshi was the one being studied like that, she would have already drawn her sword. Qin Aoxian's opponent did not seem to have any intention of drawing his sword. He challenged Qin Aoxian as if he wanted to admire her more from a closer distance. It was a strange scene. Qin Aoxian could not accompany him like that, so she unsheathed her sword. The flying deity sword. The sword was like a flying deity becoming one with the sword. In that moment, it was as if a peerless beauty had descended. Her sword came from the sky, streaking across the moonlight. It was as graceful as a swan. She was so beautiful that people could not look at her directly. She was so beautiful that people would forget themselves. Qin Aoxian's opponent seemed to be dumbfounded. He did not move at all. Qin Aoxian's sword flew past him. It seemed like she did not hit him. However, after Qin Aoxian landed on the ground, the man fell straight back. There was a dark red spot between his eyebrows. Blood condensed but did not flow down. Chapter 1284. By Yu's eeriness, Yang Zhantian's soaring battle intent, and Qin Aoxian's flying immortal chasing moon all left a deep impression on the crowd. It was the 10th seat's turn to issue a challenge. The 10th seat was Suyueshi. Suyueshi's cold eyes swept across the faces of the first 9 seats' geniuses and stopped at Qin Aoxian's face. After 3 breaths, she moved her gaze to Lian Hongyun's face. The 5th seat. Suyueshi's tone was cold. Lian Hongyun could not help but be startled. Soon after, she revealed a bitter smile, while the others revealed a smile of schadenfreude. Even so, Lian Hongyun did not back down. Suyueshi and Lian Hongyun left their seats at the same time and appeared in the middle, facing each other. Lian Hongyun did not smile bitterly. She was calm while Suyueshi's expression was cold. "Junior sister Su, there are so many people. Why do you have to pick me?" Lian Hongyun said and smiled bitterly again. Suyueshi did not answer. Lian Hongyun did not expect her to answer. Suyueshi released her dark force field as soon as she attacked. Lian Hongyun also released her fire force field. The red color spread out. The black and the red color collided and formed 2 huge hemispheres. They crashed into each other, making cracking noises. Edited by Lifer, Fingerfox. Gradually, the black force field started to gain the upper hand. It pushed back the fire force field bit by bit. Lian Hongyun shouted in a deep voice. The fire force field became stronger and expanded, pushing back the dark force field. Then, the 2 force fields penetrated each other. The dark force field shrouded Lian Hongyun, weakening her to a certain extent and strengthening her dark force field. The fire force field shrouded Suyueshi, weakening her and strengthening Lian Hongyun's fire force field. They weakened each other and strengthened each other. An intense battle began. Lian Hongyun was the 5th seat and Suyueshi was the 10th seat. It seemed that Suyueshi was weaker than Lian Hongyun, but when the battle began, Suyueshi gradually gained the upper hand. The dark force field was stronger than the fire force field. The dark force field cultivated by the dark force field was also stronger than the fire force field. Black and red intertwined and collided. Suyueshi and Lian Hongyun fought fiercely under the dual gravity field. Suyueshi was stronger than Lian Hongyun, but not by much. Both of them unleashed their ultimate technique. Darkness shrouded Suyueshi's body. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, as if a witch had descended. The sword in her hand was covered with a layer of darkness. Suyueshi floated hundreds of meters high in the air and looked down at Lian Hongyun. Powerful dark energy waves spread out from Suyueshi's body, turning her body into a black hole. The terrifying aura crushed everything. The dark force field was also compressed by Suyueshi. It merged with the black hole and exploded in an instant. It was as if the world had been destroyed. Everything lost its light and was swallowed up by the darkness. Lian Hongyun's figure was also submerged in the terrifying dark energy. Crushing. Suyueshi also paid a considerable price for this move. Her strength was exhausted, her face was pale, and she was very weak. But no matter what, she won. The 5th throne became Suyueshi's and the 10th throne became Lian Hongyun's. The genius from the 9th seat gave up because he wasn't confident. When it was Fang Tianxiong's turn, she glanced around and her gaze finally landed on Gu Luankong's face. "I want to challenge you." Fang Tianxiong stood up and her eyes shone brightly. She stared at Gu Luankong and said, "Gu Luankong, as you wish." Gu Luankong smiled lazily. The crowd couldn't help but get excited. Gu Luankong from the 1st seat was a true super genius. When he fought, he would attract everyone's attention. Gu Luankong always looked lazy and casual. But those who knew him knew that it was because he didn't have an opponent that could interest him. An opponent that he was interested in might not necessarily be a powerful one. Obviously, Fang Tianxiong wasn't an opponent that Gu Luankong was interested in. Therefore, even when Gu Luankong appeared in front of Fang Tianxiong, he still looked lazy. This made Fang Tianxiong a little annoyed. I will make you take me seriously, Fang Tianxiong said as if she was making an oath. Facing Gu Luankong, Fang Tianxiong didn't dare to relax. She released her fire force field at the beginning. She wanted to use the fire force field to increase her strength and suppress Gu Luankong. Gu Luankong didn't move at all. He just let Fang Tianxiong's fire force field cover him. Fang Tianxiong immediately performed a powerful sword skill and launched an endless stream of attacks. Gu Luankong looked lazy. He didn't use his sword. His hands were empty. His body was swaying left and right. He also staggered backward. He looked like a drunk man. However, he still managed to dodge Fang Tianxiong's attack. He let Fang Tianxiong's fire force field suppress him. He let Fang Tianxiong attack him continuously. However, Gu Luankong didn't attack at all. He just kept dodging. Fang Tianxiong didn't say something stupid like, "Don't just keep dodging." She couldn't hit Gu Luankong. This showed the difference in strength between them. Such a strange scene made the crowd frown. They thought more highly of Gu Luankong and became more cautious. He was too strong. Fang Tianxiong from the 8th seat couldn't do anything to Gu Luankong. However, Fang Tianxiong seemed to be competing with him. He performed all the sword skills he had learned. In the end, he even used his ultimate skill. Fang Tianxiong was almost exhausted. He was panting. He smiled bitterly. He put his sword back into the scabbard and said, "You are indeed powerful. You are unparalleled in the world. I admit defeat." Fang Tianxiong's evaluation was the same as many people's evaluation of Gu Luankong. He was unparalleled in the world. Gu Luankong only smiled and didn't say anything. From the beginning to the end, he didn't use any of his energy. All he did was dodge. It was easy. Every step and every dodge was just right. No wonder he is the successor of Great Emperor Luan Tian. Great Emperor Bo Su exclaimed. The first place of the Tianqing ranking will be his. Unparalleled in the world. The other two great emperors said. They thought highly of Gu Luankong. Gu Luankong had indeed displayed unparalleled strength. Fang Tianxiong admitted defeat. The 7th seat didn't change. It was the 7th seat's turn to issue a challenge. His opponent was Yang Zhantian. Yang Zhantian's battle intent was still as strong as before. The 7th seat's strength was very strong. However, compared to Yang Zhantian, there was still a huge gap. However, compared to Fang Tianxiong and Gu Luankong, he was much better. At least Yang Zhantian had to use some tricks to defeat his opponent. Next, the 6th seat's opponent was Bai Yu. This time, it was the same as last time. Bai Yu used a special eye technique and didn't attack. His opponent, the 6th seat's opponent, only took out his sword. It was as if he was fighting against an invisible force. His hand that was holding the sword kept shaking. It seemed like he was going to use a sword skill, but he was forcefully restraining himself. This battle didn't seem intense at all. It was even a little boring. However, everyone's expression was solemn because they could feel the silent killing intent. I admit defeat. In the end, the monstrous genius from the 6th seat roared. His forehead was dripping with cold sweat, drenching his face. Looking at Bai Yu's expression, it wasn't as natural as it usually was. It was obvious that the silent and invisible battle had consumed a lot of his energy. However, no matter what, even the 6th seat's opponent had been defeated. This made everyone even more cautious of Bai Yu. The 5th seat's opponent was Su Yueshi. It was supposed to be Lian Hongyun. Therefore, Lian Hongyun should be the one to issue the challenge. However, he had given up. The 4th seat's opponent was Gu Luankong, the 1st seat's opponent. It was obvious that many people wanted to be first. The only difference was whether or not they had the strength to do so. Obviously, Bai Yu felt that he had the chance. Compared to Fang Tianxiong, Gu Luankong was more interested in Bai Yu. Therefore, he didn't look as lazy as before. Bai Yu opened his eyes. His eyes were black and white. His pupils became extremely dark as if they could absorb souls. Gulwankong didn't dodge. He stared at Bai Yu. He was very interested in Bai Yu's attacks. He was also very confident in himself. Therefore, he wanted to personally experience Bai Yu's attack. Everyone saw that Bai Yu didn't move. Gulwankong also didn't move. Different from the others, Gulwankong didn't use his sword. He just stood there with his hands empty. The two of them stared at each other. Strange lights flashed in their eyes. No one knew what was going on. Time passed slowly. Bai Yu didn't move. Gulwankong also didn't move. Bai Yu's forehead was covered in sweat. In comparison, Gulwankong's forehead wasn't covered in sweat at all. After a while, more and more sweat appeared on Bai Yu's forehead. They gathered together and turned into sweat. They slowly flowed down his face. Gulwankong's forehead was still covered in sweat. However, Bai Yu's body slightly shook. After a few breaths, Bai Yu's body suddenly shook. His expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but groan. Blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. His eyes became dim and lifeless. No one said anything. However, everyone could see that Bai Yu had lost. This made the crowd less afraid of Bai Yu. However, it made them think more highly of Gulwankong. Gulwankong had shown up twice. There weren't any intense battles. However, it was more dangerous. With his absolute strength, Gulwankong had proven his strength to the crowd. The stronger Gulwankong was, the more he was like a huge mountain pressing down on the crowd's head. If anyone wanted to fight against him, they would feel a heavy pressure. It was as if an invisible mountain was pressing down on them. It was so heavy that it made it hard for them to breathe. Yang Zhantian was in the third seat. If he wanted to challenge someone, he could only challenge Qin Aoxian or Gulwankong. After thinking for a while, Yang Zhantian looked at Gulwankong and challenged him. The battle between the first seat and the third seat was highly anticipated. Chapter 1285. Yang Zhantian's Zhantian art lived up to its name. His battle intent was unparalleled. Every strike was filled with battle intent. Facing the powerful Yang Zhantian, Gulwankong could no longer act as he did before, not drawing his sword. He drew his sword, and the sword light was incomparably sharp. Yang Zhantian's sword energy was at the 4th level. Gulwankong's sword energy was also at the 4th level. Yang Zhantian used the thunder force field while Gulwankong used the wind force field. The battle between the two was very intense. However, it did not last long. Every strike was exquisite. Yang Zhantian lost. Gulwankong won. Appearing on the seat of honor, Yang Zhantian looked at Qin Aoxian and said, "I hope this battle will help you." It turned out that Yang Zhantian also knew that he was no match for Gulwankong. However, he still challenged him. His goal was to force Gulwankong to show his true strength and let Qin Aoxian know more about him. He knew that Qin Aoxian would definitely fight against Gulwankong. The next battle was Qin Aoxian's turn to challenge. She could only challenge one person, Gulwankong. "I give up," Qin Aoxian said without hesitation. She was not confident that she could defeat Gulwankong. It was expected but also unexpected. In the end, only Gulwankong was left. "I can only challenge myself," Gulwankong said. Then, the first round of the 4th stage ended. Everyone had used up one chance, no matter if they challenged or not. There were only 2 chances left. Geniuses were geniuses because of their extraordinary talent. They could improve in any environment. They could learn from the outside world to improve themselves. After a round of battles, everyone had either experienced it personally or watched it. They had all learned something. Unknowingly, everyone had improved. Suddenly, joy appeared on Chumu's face. That was because he felt that the power of the wood rule in his mental world suddenly shone brightly. Then, it retracted. However, it looked different from before. It was even more verdant and green than before. Finally, there is a power of the rules of heaven and earth. Chumu thought. The law of wood had reached the pinnacle. That feeling was completely different. It was impossible to describe it with words. In short, it was extremely wonderful. This was one piece of good news. The second piece of good news was that because he cultivated the 5 Elemental Sutra, the other 4 types of laws would be affected by the law of wood. After being tempered, they would be able to break through the peak of the subtle realm and reach the subtle realm at an even faster speed. In addition, Chu Mu had a deeper understanding of swordsmanship. After the end of the first round, there was a break to give the geniuses some time to sort out their thoughts. About an hour later, the second round began. Just like the first round, the challenges started from the 100th seat. Compared to randomly choosing opponents, this kind of challenge was more targeted. No one was willing to be last place, so it was imperative to increase one's rank. The genius in the 100th seat carefully chose his opponent based on the previous battle. This time, he was more conservative and challenged the genius in the 93rd seat. The battle began. After an intense battle, the 100th seat genius defeated the 93rd seat genius as he wished and successfully advanced to the supreme seat. One match after another was carried out continuously. Chu Mu was challenged once again. The one who challenged him was the genius in the 26th seat, Li Haosha. Chu Mu had seen Li Haosha's 3 previous battles and had won all 3. The truth was that Li Haosha had been below the 30th seat and had only managed to advance to the 26th seat through challenges. But now, he had set Chu Mu as his target. These 3 battles allowed Chu Mu to have a relatively sufficient understanding of Li Haosha's strength. On the other hand, Li Haosha didn't know much about Chu Mu's strength. In this battle, Li Haosha was destined to be defeated here. His body and qi cultivation had both broken through to the early second heaven stage of nirvana. His absolute strength had clearly risen by a great deal. Before this, he had been watching the battles while adjusting his increased strength. He needed a suitable opponent to test it out, and Li Haosha was undoubtedly a good candidate. With the sky beheading sword in hand, Chu Mu displayed his sword skills. Li Haosha had only seen Chu Mu fight once. At that time, his opponent was Ziyi. Therefore, he didn't dare to underestimate Chu Mu. As soon as he attacked, he activated his 3rd-level sword power. A pale silver luster flowed with a threatening sharpness. As Li Haosha displayed his sword skills, the power of each sword was increased by 4 times. Chu Mu also activated his 3rd-level sword power and fought with Li Haosha. Li Haosha wanted to defeat Chu Mu, so he displayed his full strength. On the other hand, Chu Mu held back a lot. For example, his 4th-level sword power, the dual sword technique, and so on. He was only using Li Haosha to hone his absolute strength. Li Haosha didn't know. He always felt that he was just a little bit away from defeating Chu Mu, but he couldn't do it. In the end, he even used his lost skill, but it was shattered by Chu Mu's tyrannical thunder prison breaker. After successfully controlling his own strength, Chu Mu unleashed a berserk attack that made it difficult for Li Haosha to block. Another sword was like lightning streaking through the sky. With incomparable ferocity, it tore through Li Haosha's defenses and injured him. In the end, Li Haosha wasn't a match for Chu Mu's attacks and lost. "You're very strong," said Li Haosha as he returned to his seat of honor. Chu Mu also returned to his seat of honor. After that, it was Ziyi's turn to challenge. Ziyi's gaze paused on Chu Mu's face for a dozen breaths, as if he was considering whether or not to challenge Chu Mu again. Chu Mu only glanced at Ziyi. If he could defeat his opponent once, then he could do it again. Perhaps because he felt that he couldn't defeat Chu Mu, Ziyi looked at the others and gave up on challenging Chu Mu. Ziyi's opponent was a genius from the 19th seat. He directly used the purple light demonic eye from the start and successfully defeated his opponent, advancing to the 19th seat. The battles continued one after another. Soon, it was Chu Mu's turn. In the first round, Chu Mu had given up the right to challenge others and lost a chance. This was the second round. If he gave up again, then he would only have one last chance. The question was, would Chu Mu give up? "I challenge." Chu Mu's gaze directly landed on the top 10 monstrous geniuses. Following Chu Mu's gaze, quite a few people revealed eager expressions. A few of them even used their gazes to provoke Chu Mu. The fourth seat. Chu Mu's voice fell, instantly causing everyone to be shocked. They all felt astonished. The fourth seat of honor was Bai Yu. He was a terrifying person who killed without spilling blood. Very few people were willing to fight him because he was too strange. Chu Mu actually took the initiative to challenge him. Was he crazy, or was he too confident? Bai Yu also seemed to be surprised, but he didn't say anything. The injuries he had suffered in the battle with Gu Wankong had already healed. Furthermore, he had also gained some benefits from that battle. It could be said that he was now slightly stronger than before. He didn't say anything. No matter who his opponent was, as long as they challenged him, he wouldn't show mercy. Guan Lin and the other divine princes couldn't help but be worried. Bai Yu's methods were too strange. If they guessed correctly, it should be related to the soul. Chu Mu also thought so. His soul was originally much stronger than others, which was why he was confident in challenging Bai Yu. Chu Mu and Bai Yu faced each other from afar. Bai Yu's pupils began to change. They became black and white, which made people's hearts palpitate. Especially the one who had been defeated by Bai Yu. His face turned pale and his body trembled uncontrollably. It was as if he was recalling the previous battle. It was an unbearable memory. The black part was the pupil, which was constantly changing. It was dark and deep, and there seemed to be a whirlpool that could absorb all light and devour people's souls. Staring at the white underworld, Chu Mu felt as if his gaze was about to be absorbed by the white underworld's black pupils. Even his thoughts, mind, and soul felt as if they were about to leave his body. With a thought, Yi Futian stabilized his mind and stood still. Just as he was about to draw his sword, Bai Yu's black pupils suddenly shone brightly and shot out. That was an invisible light. Chu Mu, who was the target of the attack, could see two rays of light flash by. They were extremely fast, beyond his imagination. He couldn't dodge them. In an instant, the two rays of light shot into Chu Mu's eyes and entered his spiritual world. Chu Mu only felt his mind churning. It was as if a black hole had appeared in his spiritual world and was sucking his mind in. Once his mind was sucked in, there would definitely be terrible consequences. Chu Mu understood this, so he resisted the black hole. His sword intent condensed, and his mind seemed to turn into a human figure. He held a sword of sword intent and slashed at the black hole whirlpool. Under Chu Mu's sword intent, the black hole whirlpool was shattered. However, it wasn't over yet. After the black hole whirlpool shattered, it didn't dissipate. Instead, it condensed into a black figure. It held a black longsword and directly attacked. It was extremely sharp. Chu Mu's mind held a sword of sword intent and fought fiercely with the black figure. No one in the outside world saw this battle because it happened in Chu Mu's spiritual world. Even the three emperors in the sky didn't know. In the outside world, Chu Mu and Bai Yu were both motionless. Their eyes were open, and light constantly flickered in them. This kind of battle on the spiritual level was the most direct and also the most dangerous. If Chu Mu lost, his spiritual energy would be injured, and it would affect his soul. Spiritual injuries were many times more troublesome than physical injuries. For example, when Bai Yu challenged Gu Wankong and lost in the end, his spiritual energy was injured. If it weren't for the extraordinary power of the Supreme Seat, it would be impossible for him to recover in a short time. Even with the help of some treasures, it would still take a long time to recover. Chapter 1286. There was no smoke in the battle in the mental world. Every strike was extremely dangerous. If one was careless and was hit, one's mind would be injured. The black sword in the black figure's hand glowed with a faint silver light. It had reached the third level of sword force. Chu Mu's mind was at a disadvantage. He quickly tried to activate sword force in the mental world. After a few attempts, he was almost killed. Finally, he succeeded in activating the third level of sword force and turned the tables. Bai Yu's accomplishments were all in his strange eyes. He was good at mental attacks and was also very good at sword technique. He combined sword techniques and mental attack. He used mental attacks to fight in the mental world of others and condensed mental energy to form a person to fight. In the battle in the mental world, other than battle techniques and swordsmanship, it mainly depended on the strength of the mental power. Bai Yu was good at the mental world. His soul was much stronger than the average person's. His mental power was also stronger. As for Chu Mu, because he was the fusion of two souls, he was only stronger than Bai Yu. In the mental world, Chu Mu suppressed Bai Yu. He attacked with sword after sword, making Bai Yu's mental power defend more than attack. In the outside world, Bai Yu's forehead started to sweat. On the other hand, Chu Mu's forehead was dry. His expression did not change. This scene was the same as when Gu Luankong was fighting Bai Yu. Looking at the situation, it seems like Bai Yu is going to lose. Bai Yu's situation is not good. Gu Luankong sat up straight again. He squinted his eyes and flashed. He had fought with Bai Yu before and experienced it personally. He knew how dangerous mental world battles were. He also knew how strong Bai Yu's mental power was. In this situation, it seemed like Chu Mu's mental power was not inferior to his at all. This kind of opponent was more interesting. In the mental world, Chu Mu completely had the upper hand. Every move was simple, direct, and extremely sharp. It made Bai Yu constantly dodge and block, unable to fight back. The sword slashed past. Strands of mental power flew up from Bai Yu's mental body and disappeared. Bai Yu's figure became fainter and fainter. In the outside world, not only was Bai Yu sweating profusely, his face was pale, and his body was trembling. Another sword slash, as if it could split a mountain, split Bai Yu's spiritual body in half. In the outside world, Bai Yu's entire body suddenly trembled, and his expression changed drastically. He let out a muffled groan, and a strand of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. As his figure swayed, he almost fell to the ground. At this point, everyone understood that Bai Yu had lost. Chu Mu's soul is exceptionally strong. Great monarch Si Su and the others' eyes lit up as they exclaimed in admiration. The other two great emperors nodded in agreement. Gu Luankong's soul power is stronger than Bai Yu's. Chu Mu's soul power is also stronger than Bai Yu's. If the Heavenly Spirit Emperor knows about this, he might be tempted. After Bai Yu was defeated, his fourth seat went to Chu Mu. As for Bai Yu, he immediately fell to the 18th seat. He was the first demonic genius to fall out of the top 10 seat. Chu Mu immediately became the center of attention. On the Heaven Azure leaderboard, Chu Mu's name shot up from the 18th place to the 4th place, shocking many people. At the same time, the fact that Chu Mu had taken the 4th seat made many people's eyes light up. Challenges could only be issued to people whose seats were higher than one's. Those who wanted to fight with Chu Mu didn't have a chance before, but now they did. For example, Lien Hongyun. Battle after battle, no one dared to challenge Chu Mu. They were fearful of Chu Mu's ability to defeat Bai Yu. When it was Lien Hongyun's turn to issue a challenge, he didn't hesitate and chose Chu Mu. When I saw you in the Heaven Azure empty world, I wanted to fight with you. Now I can finally fulfill my wish. Lien Hongyun smiled. I think so too. Chu Mu also smiled. If that's the case, let's go all out and see who's stronger. As soon as Lien Hongyun finished speaking, he immediately unleashed his fire force field. It spread out and surrounded Chu Mu. A scorching aura swept across his body. Chu Mu immediately felt that the various power of the rules of heaven and earth in his spiritual world seemed to be suppressed by a powerful scorching power. Even the power of the rules of wood, which had reached the subtle level, was suppressed. However, it wasn't as obvious as the other powers of the rules of heaven and earth. Next was the power of the rules of space. The power of space itself was very strong, much stronger than the other powers of the rules of heaven and earth. It had also reached the peak of the subtle level. Therefore, the suppression of the fire force field was the most superficial and didn't affect it much. In other words, if Chu Mu used the power of space to fight, his strength wouldn't be affected much. However, the only sword techniques based on the power of space were the lesser 8 forms of Shattering Void and the Void Sword Chi, which was an ordinary ultimate technique. The lesser 8 forms of Shattering Void was only an Earth-grade sword technique. It wasn't powerful enough to be used in a battle of this level. Although the Void Sword Chi was strong, it was an ultimate technique with a lot of restrictions. Moreover, Chu Mu didn't want to reveal his mastery of the power of space too early. Even if the power of the rules of heaven and earth was suppressed and Lien Hongyun's firepower was enhanced, Chu Mu wasn't afraid at all. He was at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. In terms of both chi and body cultivation, the strength of his sword energy wasn't inferior to an ordinary early stage of the third sky of Nirvana realm. The gap between him and Lien Hongyun wasn't that obvious. Lien Hongyun didn't have any cultivation in body cultivation. In terms of absolute strength, Chu Mu wouldn't be weaker than him. Lien Hongyun and Chu Mu were the same. They both specialized in sword techniques for close combat. The two of them drew their swords and started fighting. The collision of power caused the sword light to flicker. It was fierce and domineering. It was brilliant beyond compare. Lien Hongyun's sword technique was quite good. In the fierce battle, the sword energy he unleashed had reached the 4th level. Looking at the color, it was between light silver and silver. It seemed that he had just broken through. Chu Mu also unleashed the 4th level sword energy, which was surprising. Under the 4th level sword energy, the two of them were on par with each other. However, the battle became more intense. Exquisite sword techniques were displayed to the fullest. It was like a piece of art. Chu Mu's sword technique is far better than his peers. Great Emperor Sisu and the others praised again. Since he knew about Chu Mu, he had lost count of how many times he had praised him. Lien Hongyun's sword technique was also extraordinary. However, compared to Chu Mu, there was still an obvious gap. The battle between the two of them, especially Chu Mu's performance, ignited Yang Zhantian's fighting spirit. Despite being suppressed by Lien Hongyun's fire force field, he was still able to fight Lien Hongyun to such an extent. He was even showing signs of suppressing Lien Hongyun. In reality, if his cultivation hadn't broken through, it wouldn't have been so easy for Chu Mu to fight against Lien Hongyun. "You're really strong. I'm going to use my secret skill now." Lien Hongyun quickly retreated. Then, he suddenly leaped up a few hundred meters into the air. Looking down from above, he was surrounded by surging energy waves. The red color was constantly emitted from his body. He waved the sword in his hand at high speed. The sword light was as red as fire. It rolled and surged, forming a fiery red cloud around him. The sword light rolled in the red cloud and formed another red cloud. "It's the refined cloud 9 tribulations, sword of the refined cloud, Great Emperor. I wonder how much Lien Hongyun has mastered?" Great Emperor Sisu thought to himself. Lien Hongyun didn't use the refined cloud 9 tribulations sword in the battle with Suyueshi. It was unknown whether it was because he didn't have the time or he didn't want to. As soon as the refined cloud 9 tribulations sword was used, the red cloud condensed. Terrifying energy waves were emitted from it and surged between heaven and earth. Chu Mu's expression turned serious. He kept increasing his strength, chi cultivation and physique cultivation. He felt like he was being targeted. He knew that this time, Lien Hongyun's attack couldn't be dodged. 3 red clouds were circling around Lien Hongyun. Being covered by the fire force field and being locked down by the 3 red clouds' powerful auras, Chu Mu was under immense pressure. Under the treasure robe, the muscles all over his body vibrated slightly, shaking off the aura that was coming at him. Ripples that were hard to see with the naked eye appeared around Chu Mu. It was the aura being forced away by the vibrations of his muscles. It looked a bit strange. "Take this." Lien Hongyun's voice came from the sky. The sword in his hand suddenly paused. Then, he slashed down fiercely. In an instant, the 3 red clouds rotated. Refined Cloud 9 Tribulations Sword. 1 cloud, 1 sword, 1 calamity. The red clouds turned into giant swords and slashed down from the sky. The heaven and earth shook. The 3 enormous red swords seemed to split the heavens and earth apart as they continuously slashed downwards. Their might was shocking, especially for Chu Mu, who was directly facing the 3 enormous red cloud swords. The pressure he felt increased exponentially and his entire body seemed to emit cracking sound. If it weren't for his tyrannical body cultivation, it would have been hard for him to even move. Refined Cloud 9 Tribulations Sword. It was a terrifying supreme art. Chu Mu's thoughts turned quickly. His strength exploded. The heaven-beheading sword was lifted up, as if it was tearing the space in front of him. He used the first move of the ancient sword art, wind rises and thunder extinguishes. The wind blew and thunder fell, weakening the first giant sword. Then, he used the thunder prison break to shatter the first giant red cloud sword. The second giant red cloud sword slashed down, followed by the third. One sword after another. If he successfully cultivated the 9 Tribulations Cloud Sword, 9 giant swords would appear, one after the other, continuously attacking 9 times. Moreover, the power of the next sword would be several times more tyrannical than the previous one. It was very frightening. Fortunately, Lien Hongyun had only mastered the first 3 swords of the refined Cloud 9 Tribulations sword. These first 3 swords were the most basic ones. The increase in power wasn't that obvious. Otherwise, Chu Mu would have a hard time resisting. With the second giant sword, Chu Mu released the void-piercing sword Qi. The void-piercing sword Qi had a lot of restrictions. Once used, one couldn't use it again for a short period of time. However, its power was absolutely powerful. When it collided with the second giant sword, it actually shattered the second giant sword. It turned into clouds and dissipated. However, the void-piercing sword Qi also became faintly discernible. It was as if it would dissipate if a gust of wind blew past. The third giant sword slashed down, as if it didn't give Chu Mu any time to react. The void-piercing sword Qi that was about to dissipate went up and collided with the third giant sword. With a puchi, the void-piercing sword Qi dissipated and disappeared. The third giant sword paused for a moment. This pause bought Chu Mu some time to react. The accumulated power instantly exploded out. The muscles all over his body vibrated at high speed. The earthquake force was used to the maximum. The blade of the heaven-beheading sword vibrated crazily. The space seemed to be torn apart. The divine wilderness sword essence was infused. Man and sword became one and soared into the sky. Chapter 1287. Golden light and silver luster intersected and surged on the sword body. The sword blade vibrated at high speed, and the terrifying sharpness was unstoppable. Man and sword became one. As Chu Mu soared into the sky, he slashed out with his sword. The sword light seemed to tear apart space as it slashed towards the falling red cloud sword. The red cloud giant sword was more than 10 meters long. With one slash, it seemed to be able to split hundreds of sacred mountains. Chu Mu faced it head-on. The contrast between the 1-meter-long sword light was very obvious and worrisome. The golden and silver sword light collided with the red cloud giant's sword at a high frequency that could not be captured by divine consciousness. At this moment, everyone seemed to hear the sound of space shattering. That scene seemed to be frozen and turned into eternity. Cracking sounds were heard continuously. A gap appeared at the place where the heaven-beheading sword and the red cloud giant sword collided. Cracks like lightning zigzagged. Chu Mu exerted his strength again, and the red cloud giant sword was shattered and splashed away. Chu Mu, who was one with his sword, carried a terrifying aura as he charged towards Lien Hongyun. In fact, Chu Mu had used up a lot of energy to shatter the red cloud giant sword. Although he looked fierce when he rushed towards Lien Hongyun, he was actually running out of energy. However, after using the refined Cloud 9 Tribulations sword, Lien Hongyun had used up a lot of energy and his muscles were stiff and sore. He needed some time to recover. He thought that with the refined Cloud 9 Tribulations sword, even if he could not defeat Chu Mu, he could at least injure Chu Mu. Chu Mu rushed to the sky and arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. The golden and silver sword light was extremely sharp. It tore through the sky and blinded Lien Hongyun. Lien Hongyun had only recovered part of his energy. He barely raised his sword to block the attack. However, Chu Mu's attack was too fast. It was beyond his reaction time, and he could not block or dodge it. He felt a sharp pain on his neck and his neck was cut in half. In everyone's eyes, everything happened in the blink of an eye. They only saw Chu Mu shattering the third red cloud sword and becoming one with the sword. The sword light soared into the sky like a bolt of lightning, crossing the sky and passing by Lien Hongyun. Lien Hongyun's head was separated from her body. "You're too ruthless." Lien Hongyun smiled bitterly after being reborn on the 10th seat. The feeling of being beheaded by a sword was extremely unbearable. "You are too strong. I have no choice but to be ruthless." Chu Mu returned to the 4th seat and smiled. The two of them were joking around as if they were friends, which made people a little envious. "Did you see it clearly?" Great Emperor Bo Su asked. "The power of vibration. I didn't expect Chu Mu to have such a power. How terrifying." The middle-aged man sighed. "It's not difficult to make the sword vibrate at high speed. However, it's difficult to do it like Chu Mu," the female Great Emperor said after giving it a try. Indeed, it wasn't difficult to make the power of vibration. Anyone with a high realm and good control over their power could do it. However, it was difficult to make it as subtle as Chu Mu's. It required a corresponding cultivation method, which happened to be the inheritance of Zhen Tian's sect. With Lien Hongyun defeated, the 9th seat's demon issued a challenge. His gaze swept across Chu Mu's face. Chu Mu had first defeated Bai Yu, then defeated Lien Hongyun, letting everyone know of his powerful strength. One couldn't use cultivation as a benchmark. Challenging Chu Mu without confidence was a waste of opportunity. After thinking about it, the 9th seat monster gave up. Perhaps he felt that he wasn't confident. Actually, as long as he could keep the 9th seat, he would be ranked 9th on the Heaven Azure ranking. It was a very high ranking. The 8th seat Fang Tianxiong also gave up after thinking about it. He wasn't confident. The upper seats were all capable people. He wasn't their match. The 7th seat monster thought differently. Even if he wasn't their match, he still wanted to challenge them. It didn't matter if he was killed. Therefore, he challenged Chu Mu. It was Chu Mu's third battle. The 7th seat monster wasn't as strong as Lien Hongyun. He wasn't Chu Mu's match at all. Hence, he was defeated by Chu Mu. The 6th seat monster gave up. The 5th seat monster was Su Yueshi. Everyone looked at Su Yueshi's face. They followed her gaze to see what she would choose. Su Yueshi's cold eyes first landed on Qin Aoxian's face. When she met Qin Aoxian's cold eyes, their gazes clashed. Both of them emitted waves of qi. It seemed that Su Yueshi was ready to challenge Qin Aoxian, and Qin Aoxian was ready to be challenged. "I challenge the 4th seat," Su Yueshi said in the end. Everyone was shocked. Even Qin Aoxian was startled. Chu Mu stared blankly, but his expression returned to normal. This was something he had expected. "I will let you know that strength is the most important thing." Su Yueshi's tone was cold. It seemed like she wanted to freeze Chu Mu. "Please." Chu Mu's reply to the aggressive Su Yueshi was very calm. This made Su Yueshi a bit angry. She frowned and then relaxed. However, her eyes were even colder. "Which Su is going to go crazy? You're on your own now." Lien Hongyun looked like she was waiting to watch a good show. Su Yueshi's sword was black. It was deep and shiny. It even gave off a faint halo. It was a sky-piercing saint sword. Dark power rippled from the black sky-piercing saint sword. The halo was formed by the power ripples. The angry Tsuyoshi suddenly waved her hand. The sword actually left her hand and flew towards Chumu. It was straight and fast. It pierced through the void and left a black mark in the air. This move was completely out of everyone's expectations. Swordsmen focused on cutting through everything with their sword in hand. There was a black thread between Tsuyoshi's index finger and the sword. It was that black thread that allowed Tsuyoshi to have absolute control over the sword. The sword turned into a sharp black light. It was extremely fast and shot towards Chumu. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of Chumu as if it was going to pierce through him. The black light contained a power that confused the mind. It wanted to interfere with Chumu's judgment and make Chumu hesitate. Chumu's soul power was very strong. His mind was very firm. He was not affected at all. Seeing the black light flying towards him, he raised the sky-sword. Under the control of Tsuyoshi's finger, the black light quickly changed. It avoided Chumu's sword and slashed towards Chumu's neck from the side. It was fast, fierce, and merciless. Suddenly, Tsuyoshi stretched out her finger again. The black sword light that was slashing towards Chumu's neck suddenly trembled and split into a second one. Under the control of Tsuyoshi's finger, it appeared behind Chumu and stabbed forward. All of a sudden, Chumu was attacked from two sides. In the previous battle between Tsuyoshi and Lien Hongyun, it seemed that Tsuyoshi had used her full strength. However, she had held back a lot, whether it was Lien Hongyun's refining Cloud 9 Tribulations sword or Tsuyoshi's sword silk control technique. With the sky-sword in hand, Chumu did not dance wildly. Instead, he casually attacked with his sword. However, every sword attack contained the essence of Chumu's swordsmanship. It constantly blocked the attacks of the two black lights and quickly approached Tsuyoshi. Chumu had attacked a few times. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he had unique strength in close combat. Tsuyoshi also saw this point. That was why she used the sword silk control technique to attack Chumu from a distance. Since she wanted to keep a distance, Tsuyoshi could not let Chumu get close to her. She stretched out her third finger and shot out the third sword silk. Immediately, the black light split into a third and attacked Chumu from a third direction. The front, left, and right were all attacked. Chumu was delayed. The sword silk control technique is really powerful. As expected of the Devil Queen's successor, Great Emperor Bo-Su said. The Devil Queen was also a great emperor. The title of Devil Queen had been passed down since ancient times. Tsuyoshi was the only successor of the Devil Queen. Compared to the successors of the great emperors, Chumu's means were still too little. This was his weakness. However, his advantages were also obvious. He cultivated both qi and blood. His absolute strength was not inferior to the successors of the great emperors. His sword intent was amazing, his soul power was strong, his swordsmanship was brilliant, and he had mastered the power of the Zhen Tian style. That was why he could contend with his opponents and not be at a disadvantage. However, Tsuyoshi, who had used the sword silk control technique, was controlling three black lights. Each one of them was shockingly powerful and carried a strange fluctuation that disturbed one's mind. They couldn't be underestimated, so Chumu could only carefully deal with them. If this continued, it would become a competition of endurance. Seems like I can only use the dual sword technique, Chumu thought to himself. With a thought, the imperishable sword flew out from his body and appeared in his left hand. With two swords in hand, Chumu's strength increased greatly. He slashed the black lights with his left and right swords and crossed them. The cross-sword light broke through the sky like thunder and shattered the black lights in front of him. The sudden change caused everyone to be shocked. Tsuyoshi was also shocked. She never would have thought that Chumu, who was wielding a sword in each hand, would have such a clear increase in strength. She wanted to condense a third black light, But it was already too late because Chu Mu had grasped the momentary opportunity. His strength exploded and surged to the soles of his feet. Under the high-frequency vibration, he used inch step, causing a powerful impact with the ground. With a boom, Chu Mu crossed his two swords and slashed forward. The cross-sword light was the vanguard. It tore through the air and pushed Chu Mu's speed to the extreme. It far exceeded the speed of sound and approached Tsuyueshi. Tsuyueshi's expression changed slightly. She used the heavenly devil phantom body movement technique and became erratic and unpredictable. Every step she took had a strong power to confuse and disturb the mind. At the same time, she called back the heavenly saint's sword, which turned into a wisp of black light and surrounded her. Seeing that the sword silk control technique could not do anything to Chu Mu and that Chu Mu was still close to her, Tsuyueshi quickly reacted after being slightly surprised. She used the heavenly demon phantom body technique and the sky demon sword transformation technique at the same time. A sturdy heavenly connecting sacred sword, under the heavenly devil sword transformation technique, became a black belt of light that circled the surroundings. Circle after circle, it was endless, causing Chu Mu's violent attacks to be completely ineffective. They were completely blocked on the outside. Under the sky demon sword transformation technique, the sky-piercing saint's sword turned into a black light belt like a snake. Not only did it continuously dissolve Chu Mu's attacks, it also waited for an opportunity to counterattack Chu Mu from an incredible angle. Chapter 1288. Tsuyueshi's heavenly demon shadow body technique made her figure appear countless. As she changed, she had a strong power to confuse the mind. Many of the geniuses who were watching were disturbed and could not make accurate judgments. Some were even confused and lost in it. It was as if they were watching a beautiful dance and could not extricate themselves. Under the heavenly demon sword transformation technique, the heavenly saint's sword twined and dissolved Chu Mu's thunderous attack. This was using softness to overcome hardness. Tsuyueshi's mastery in this aspect was profound and unique, which made Chu Mu's attacks ineffective. Tsuyueshi's swordsmanship was even better than Lien Hongyun's. The golden and silver sword light intertwined. Under the level 4 sword energy, Chu Mu's two swords were incredibly powerful. However, Tsuyueshi's heavenly demon sword transformation technique was also infused with level 4 sword energy, which constantly dissolved Chu Mu's attack. Using softness to overcome hardness, Chu Mu also understood this point. However, he could not find a way to break it because his opponent Tsuyueshi's swordsmanship was profound. She was only slightly inferior to him. Chu Mu was not surprised. His previous opponents were obviously not as good as him in swordsmanship. However, this did not mean that everyone's swordsmanship was not as good as his. The reason why a demon was that he must be extraordinary in all aspects. He was much better than ordinary people. As the only successor of the Devil Queen, Tsuyueshi's talent was unquestionable. It was also reasonable that her swordsmanship was superb. The black sword light under the heavenly demon sword transformation technique dissolved Chu Mu's attack. It also counterattacked Chu Mu like a snake, forcing Chu Mu to block with his sword. The battle between the two was in a stalemate. Gradually, Chu Mu changed the style of his swordsmanship. It was no longer as violent as thunder. Instead, it became soft and continuous like a clear stream. In this soft and continuous flow, there was a sense of endless vitality. It was as if the trees and grass were growing. This was the combination of the rules of water and the rules of wood. The combination of water and wood made the aura of endless vitality even more intense. Tsuyueshi used softness to conquer strength, and Chu Mu responded in the same way. Tsuyueshi frowned slightly. Originally, her Sky Demon Transformation sword technique could completely neutralize Chu Mu's thunderous attack. However, now that Chu Mu had changed the style of his swordsmanship, it had the flexibility of water and the endless vitality of wood. The continuous power of life constantly seeped into her, causing the Sky Demon transformation sword technique to become several times more difficult to deal with. This fellow has actually grasped a second style of swordsmanship. Moreover, he is so proficient in it. Lien Hongyun was secretly shocked. It was common knowledge that different swordsmen would focus on different aspects of basic sword technique. Different methods would result in different styles. No matter what style of swordsmanship it was, it had its own uniqueness. It required a lot of time and energy to cultivate and comprehend in order to become more profound. Therefore, most swordsmen only mastered one style of swordsmanship. The power of heaven and earth they were proficient in was closely related to the style of swordsmanship. The various swordsmanship they cultivated in the future would inevitably be directly or indirectly related. Even a genius who mastered two styles of swordsmanship would usually be proficient in one style and familiar with the other. From the beginning, everyone had thought that Chu Mu's swordsmanship style was as violent as thunderbolts. The violent swordsmanship was the style that Chu Mu was most proficient in. Who would have thought that Chu Mu had changed his style of swordsmanship? Moreover, he was so proficient in it that it was not inferior to his previous violent swordsmanship. This lad is really a genius in swordsmanship. Great Emperor Bo Su and the other two exclaimed again. The two swords were endless. The sword light was as flexible as silk ribbons that surrounded Suyueshi's body. It constantly attacked from all angles, penetrating the Sky Demon transformation sword technique's defense and attacking Suyueshi. As the battle progressed, Chu Mu's understanding of the essence of swordsmanship also improved bit by bit. The experience in Sky Green Empty World and the part of memory that remained had not been completely converted by Chu Mu. There was still a part that remained, and it would take a long time for him to completely absorb and convert it for his own use. The Supreme Seat Challenge and the many demon-like geniuses were the way to convert the previous experience into strength. After the battle, Chu Mu gradually grasped Suyueshi's Sky Demon transformation sword technique. The style of swordsmanship changed again. It was no longer as violent as thunderbolts, nor as flexible as before. Every stroke became strange and tricky, stabbing from unbelievable angles and penetrating all openings. In Suyueshi's eyes, there was only the sword light that was constantly approaching and penetrating through the gaps of her Sky Demon transformation sword technique. The style of swordsmanship this time was mainly stabbing, leaning towards being strange and tricky. Every stroke gave off a feeling that it was sharp and unstoppable. The appearance of the third style of swordsmanship shocked everyone. There were very few people who could master two styles of swordsmanship and achieve proficiency in both. However, there were still a few who could master three styles of swordsmanship and achieve proficiency in both. Since ancient times, there were very few people who could master three styles of swordsmanship and achieve proficiency in both. The three great emperors were not amazed this time, but shocked. After Chu Mu performed the third style of swordsmanship, Suyueshi's Sky Demon transformation sword technique was broken. First, the sword silk control technique was broken. Now, the Sky Demon transformation sword technique was broken. Even the Sky Demon phantom body technique did not seem to have any effect on Chu Mu. Suyueshi could not help but feel a sense of defeat in her heart. She immediately adjusted herself and clenched the Sky Demon Saint sword in her hand, performing the Sky Demon Saint sword technique. The demonic god-slaying sword technique was also the true inheritance of the Demon Queen. It was a heaven-level upper-grade sword technique, but because Suyueshi had not mastered it well enough, the power it could unleash was only slightly stronger than an ordinary heaven-level middle-grade sword technique. As soon as Suyueshi unleashed her heavenly devil god-slaying sword art, the terrifying heavenly devil god-slaying sword chi shot across the sky. Each of the black sword chi seemed to be able to slaughter gods and demons. The killing intent on it made people shudder. Those who were not mentally strong enough would probably collapse in an instant. Chu Mu performed the ancient sword technique to counter it. He was very vigilant against Tsuyoeshi's Sky Demon Saint Sword technique. The power of the ancient sword technique was indeed not as strong as the Sky Demon Saint Sword technique. The terrifying Sky Demon Saint Sword chi shot in all directions. Then, Tsuyoeshi performed the Sky Demon Saint Sword technique's powerful sword move, making Chu-Mu feel like he was going to be killed on the spot. At this critical moment, Chu-Mu's body trembled. The silver luster on the sword became even more intense. The sword force broke through at this critical moment and reached level 5 from level 4. Level 5 sword force could increase the power of the sword technique by 6 times. The power of the ancient sword technique was not inferior to the Sky Demon Saint sword technique that was below level 4 sword force. He defeated the Sky Demon Saint sword technique's sword move with Wind Rise and Thunder Destroy. Then, he used Thunder Prison Break to exhaust Tsuyoeshi. The Heavenly Devil Slaughtering God sword technique couldn't do anything to Chu-Mu either. Tsuyoeshi's anger could be easily imagined, while Lien Hongyun's smile blossomed like a flower. He was a heartless friend. No matter who was unlucky, he would feel happy, especially when Tsuyoeshi and Chu-Mu had both defeated him. I can't understand Chu-Mu more and more after breaking through in battle. Great Monarch Bo-Su smiled bitterly. Gu Luankong's eyes were shining brightly. His eyes were shining brightly, and there were traces of battle intent brewing in his eyes. After breaking through the Thunder Prison Break, Tsuyoeshi performed the second move of the Sky Demon Saint sword technique. It was like a demon god had descended. Murderous aura filled the air. Vaguely, one could see corpses floating in the air. As if knowing that this move could not do anything to Chu-Mu, Tsuyoeshi soared into the sky. A few hundred meters in the air, a dark force field burst out from her body. A terrifying suction force seemed to have transformed into a black hole, trying to devour everything between heaven and earth and turn them into dust. Tsuyoeshi was going to perform her ultimate move. Back then, Lien Hongyun was defeated by this move. The terrifying fluctuation made Chu-Mu's face turn solemn. He had seen it once before. Since then, he had been thinking about how to counter it. Seeing the dark force field around Tsuyoeshi becoming stronger and stronger, Chu-Mu's face turned solemn. He clenched the two swords in his hands and activated his level 5 sword force to the maximum. All of the Divine Baron sword energy was infused into the swords. His strength surged and he soared into the sky with a boom. Chu-Mu's method to counter Tsuyoeshi's ultimate move was to make the first move. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to dodge or counter Tsuyoeshi's ultimate move. The void sword light was divided into two and gathered on the two swords, increasing the power of the two swords by several times. The two swords crossed and the cross sword light soared into the sky. The man and the sword became one and cut across the sky at an extremely fast speed towards Tsuyoeshi. The dark force field expanded and blocked Chu-Mu. After a slight pause, it was cut open by Chu-Mu's cross sword light and went straight for Tsuyoeshi. The ultimate move that was not fully charged could only explode in advance. It was like a black storm of destruction that wanted to destroy Chu-Mu. Within the darkness, there was a sword light that was intertwined with gold and silver, tearing the black storm of destruction apart. Tsuyoeshi was unable to finish channeling her ultimate technique. She unleashed it prematurely, causing a certain burden on her. She groaned and her face turned pale. Her eyes carried traces of fatigue, but she had no choice but to face Chu-Mu's sword light. Chu-Mu would not go easy on Tsuyoeshi just because of her beauty. In a battle, she was either his partner or his enemy. After defeating Tsuyoeshi's ultimate technique, Chu-Mu's energy was greatly depleted. In the sky, the two swords launched an attack. The thunder-like attacks were violent and unstoppable. Every sword contained powerful energy, causing Tsuyoeshi to only be able to passively defend. Under Chu-Mu's attacks, she continued to descend. After another heavy sword attack, Tsuyoeshi fell from the sky. Chu-Mu adjusted his body in the sky and faced down. As the two swords crossed, the last burst of power burst out. With a loud bang, it was like a meteorite falling from the sky and bombarding Tsuyoshi mercilessly. A terrifying aura. Tsuyoshi's face turned pale, but she didn't admit defeat. She clenched her teeth and her falling body paused in midair. Then, she exploded with power and flew into the sky. Unexpectedly, she charged towards Chu-Mu at high speed. She looked like she was going to meet force with force and fight with her life on the line. This made everyone's expression change. Chapter 1289. With a loud boom, everyone's eyes widened. There was only one thought in their minds. You beast! How could you do that? You're in trouble. Lien Hongyun was stunned for a moment, then chuckled. Tsuyoshi and Chu-Mu clashed head-on, and the result was an explosion. How cruel, many murmured. Even Qin Aoxian frowned slightly. In any case, it was a cruel thing to blow up Tsuyoshi, such a beautiful woman who could charm all living beings. He couldn't bear to do it just thinking about it, let alone actually doing it. However, Chu-Mu did it. He really did it. He killed Tsuyoshi head-on. It was definitely not a good feeling to be killed. Tsuyoshi was reborn on the seat of honor. Her expression was several times colder than usual. One look at her would make one shiver. The way she looked at Chu-Mu almost froze the air. It was more like two sharp swords that wanted to pierce through Chu-Mu. Chu-Mu looked calm, but he could not help but smile bitterly in his mind. Speaking of which, he admired Tsuyoshi a little. However, it was also a headache to deal with people like her. She had the chance to admit defeat, but she refused to do so. Instead, she chose to sacrifice herself and pressed forward. People like her were more than just stubborn and competitive. They were not easy to deal with. However, since he had already done it, Chu-Mu would not regret it, nor would he apologize. Since she was his opponent, he would fight with all he had. Even if he had to do it again, Chu-Mu would not hesitate. As a result, he was known as a cruel person. It's a pity that I can't choose you as my opponent. Yang Zhantian looked at Chu-Mu and said. The battle intent in his eyes was overbearing. Because Chu-Mu was the fourth seat of honor, and Yang Zhantian was the third seat of honor. Yang Zhantian could only challenge Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong. He could also choose to forfeit. In the end, Yang Zhantian challenged Gu Luankong. Yang Zhantian had challenged Gu Luankong once and lost. This was the second time. The first time, Yang Zhantian challenged Gu Luankong because of Qin Aoxian. This time, he challenged Gu Luankong because of Qin Aoxian. Yang Zhantian's faction had always been fighting without rest. No matter who the opponent was, they were fearless, tempering their battle intent and advancing courageously. Gu Luankong was indeed very powerful, but Yang Zhantian wasn't afraid of him at all. Instead, he hoped that he could fight with someone like Gu Luankong more often. Fighting with someone like Gu Luankong could stimulate his battle intent and train his battle intent, which would be very beneficial to his cultivation of the art of conquering the heavens. Gu Luankong didn't refuse and fought with Yang Zhantian again. Yang Zhantian's battle intent soared to the heavens. The more he fought, the more ferocious he became. To Yang Zhantian's lineage, combat was the true meaning, and offense was the essence. Yang Zhantian was not weak, and Gu Luankong could not underestimate him either. He immediately performed a mid-grade heaven-level sword art to counter Yang Zhantian's attack. It was a sword art that mainly relied on the rule of wind. Gu Luankong's forte was the rule of space. Now, he was using the rule of wind to counter Yang Zhantian. This meant that he wasn't using all of his strength. Gu Luankong's mastery of sword art was exquisite. It was unique and he had integrated his own understanding into it. Yang Zhantian's battle intent soared to the heavens. His attacks were ferocious, but they were all countered by Gu Luankong. Gu Luankong's casual counterattacks made Yang Zhantian take them seriously. An exciting and intense battle ended with Yang Zhantian's defeat. Although he lost, Yang Zhantian didn't feel depressed at all. Instead, he looked excited. The battle just now had enlightened him. There was nothing better than this. Next, it was Qin Aoxian's turn. She gave up in the previous round. Everyone was curious whether Qin Aoxian would give up again in this round. Qin Aoxian stood up and glanced at Gulwankong. Her body floated away from the seat. Gulwankong's body flickered and also left the seat. The energy that he used in the previous battle was quickly recovered to its peak after he returned to the seat. Qin Aoxian, peerless. Gulwankong, peerless. Qin Aoxian against Gulwankong, peerless against peerless. The light from the two couldn't be concealed. Everyone's gaze was focused on the two of them. A gust of wind came from nowhere. It blew their long hair and clothes, making them flutter gently. It made Qin Aoxian look more like a fairy, and Gulwankong look more casual. The wind whistled. She pointed the flying fairy sword at Gulwankong. "Senior brother Gu, please." Qin Aoxian's voice was cold like spring water. It was pleasing to the ear. "Junior sister Qin, please." Gulwankong also replied seriously. Gulwankong seemed to know that Qin Aoxian was powerful. He wasn't so lazy. Qin Aoxian drew her sword. She flicked the flying fairy sword slightly. Instantly, a white sword chi shot out. When the sword chi left the tip of the sword and shot towards Gulwankong, it split into 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. It kept multiplying until there were hundreds of them. They attacked Gulwankong from all directions, from all angles. That one sword showed Qin Aoxian's unparalleled control over her own power. Many people thought that they couldn't do that. Suyueshi's beautiful eyes stared at Qin Aoxian. Gulwankong drew his sword. As he waved his sword, the air around the sword was stirred up and distorted. It was only one sword, but it strangely gathered all of Qin Aoxian's hundreds of sword chi into one. It was reflected at Qin Aoxian at an even faster speed. Qin Aoxian flicked the tip of her sword and reflected the sword chi back. At the same time, she flew up and followed behind the sword chi. She became one with her sword and streaked across the sky like a fairy. She was beautiful, elegant, and calm. Her murderous intent was hidden. Gulwankong raised his sword and slashed down. The void rippled as if it was split open. The sword chi was shattered. A formless power surged towards Qin Aoxian. The tip of Qin Aoxian's sword shone, shattering the formless power. The cloud force field spread out. Gulwankong also released the wind force field. The two force fields fought against each other. Qin Aoxian used the flying shadow sword art. Her sword was like a flying shadow. The flying shadow sword chi was sharp and flashing. It spread out in all directions. Every flying shadow sword chi contained the characteristics of the rules of shadow. Gulwankong also used the sky wind sword art. The sky wind sword chi was much more powerful under the wind force field. It was fast and sharp. The two of them fought in the form of sword chi, displaying their astonishing control over sword chi. The sword chi flew and filled the surroundings. It was extremely sharp and unstoppable. The two sword chi kept colliding, shattering and splashing. Gulwankong was at the late stage of the third sky of Nirvana realm. Qin Aoxian was also at the late stage of the third sky of Nirvana realm. Their cultivation techniques were at the same level. The battle of sword chi turned into a close-range battle of sword arts. Basic sword arts and Heaven Realm sword arts were used alternately. It was too much for the audience to take in. Chumu was also immersed in it. He kept simulating it. He treated himself as Qin Aoxian's opponent and Gulwankong's opponent. He used them to fight. The essence of a sword art was brought out by the two of them. It also had a strong personal style. "Junior sister Qin, you can't defeat me with this." Gulwankong's voice sounded. Then, "Senior brother Gu, please enlighten me." Qin Aoxian's tone was still so cold and pleasant. She didn't hold back at all. If anyone let their guard down because of her voice, they would end up in a miserable state. Flying fairy force field. Qin Aoxian let out a low cry that sounded like a murmur. A white shadow spread out from her body in an instant. Wisps of light and elegant aura surged out, calming people down and making them feel comfortable. It was as if they were willing to lose themselves in it and never wake up again. At that moment, Gu Luankong was surrounded by the flying fairy force field. He was suppressed by the flying fairy force field. When Qin Aoxian used the flying fairy force field, Suyueshi's face turned pale. Since ancient times, the flying fairy tribe and the demon queen's tribe had been at odds. As the successor of the flying fairy tribe and the successor of the demon queen's tribe, Qin Aoxian and Suyueshi were at odds. The flying fairy force field was a technique unique to the flying fairy tribe. The demon queen's tribe had the sky demon force field. The flying fairy force field and the sky demon force field were similar in power. They were at odds with each other. Suyueshi's face changed because she hadn't mastered the sky demon force field yet. Qin Aoxian had already used the flying fairy force field in battle. Suyueshi couldn't tolerate falling behind by a big step. Gu Luankong's face changed too. As the symbol of the flying fairy tribe, the flying fairy force field was powerful. He didn't dare to underestimate it. Under the influence of the flying fairy force field, not only were the rules of heaven and earth suppressed, even the sword origin was suppressed. Their minds were also affected. Luckily, Qin Aoxian's flying fairy force field was only at the beginner level. She couldn't unleash its full power. Even so, Gu Luankong could feel that his strength had been significantly weakened. Qin Aoxian's strength had been greatly increased because of the flying fairy force field. Under such circumstances, no matter how powerful Gu Luankong was, he knew that he couldn't defeat Qin Aoxian. Junior sister Qin, the flying fairy force field is indeed powerful, said Gu Luankong. Gu Luankong said as a sharp light shot out from his eyes. His pupils also turned into a faint silver color. Strands of strange energy rippled around his body as his long hair fluttered in the wind. At that moment, Gu Luankong's laziness was swept away. He became serious. Among all the geniuses, Qin Aoxian was the first one that he had to take seriously. Strands of silver wrapped around Gu Luankong's body and expanded rapidly. Strands of silver grew in the air like vines. In the blink of an eye, they merged with the flying celestial force field and surrounded Qin Aoxian. The flying fairy force field seemed to be affected by the strands of silver energy. The light inside was distorted. Qin Aoxian could feel that she was also being suppressed by a force. The force was ethereal, tough, and indestructible. Chaotic space force field. Qin Aoxian said coldly. Her voice was stern. The chaotic space force field was the true inheritance of the chaotic sky emperor. It was based on the rules of space. It was a very powerful force field. Once the chaotic space force field was unleashed, Gu Luankong was completely suppressed by the flying fairy force field. His strength had also been strengthened. The flying fairy force field had also eliminated the suppression of the chaotic space force field to a certain extent. The flying fairy force field had increased his strength. After Gu Luankong unleashed the chaotic space force field, Chu Mu had been watching and comprehending it. Chapter 1290. The flying immortal force field was formed by the fusion of multiple force fields. It also contained the unique essence of the flying immortal lineage. It was profound and powerful. The chaotic space force field was only a force field formed by the space force field. The most basic force field based on the space force field was the space force field. The chaotic space force field was a deeper application of the space force field. It could cause the space within the force field to become chaotic. Not only could it suppress the opponent and increase one's strength, but it also had the special ability to mess up space. It was the true essence of the chaotic sky emperor's lineage. A normal space force field was far more powerful than any other single force field. It was almost equivalent to a normal force field formed by the fusion of three force fields of the heaven and earth. However, it was not comparable to the flying immortal force field. The chaotic space force field was different. It could fight against the flying immortal force field without being at a disadvantage. The chaotic space force field, and the flying immortal force field coexisted to suppress the opponent and increase one's strength. Qin Aoxian used another sword technique. It was a high-grade heaven-level sword technique. It was called the flying immortal sword technique. The sword technique that Qin Aoxian usually used against her enemies was the flying shadow sword technique of the heaven class. Although there was a difference of one class, the difference between the flying shadow sword technique and the flying fairy sword technique was huge. The flying fairy sword technique was the true heritage of the flying fairy sect. The flying immortal sword technique was very compatible with the flying immortal sword. It was also compatible with the flying immortal force field. Once it was used, flying immortal sword chi shot out from the flying immortal force field. Each flying immortal sword chi was like a flying immortal's shadow. It was light and graceful, as if it had descended from the sky. It was beautiful and pleasing to the eye. When Qin Aoxian used the flying immortal sword technique, she also used the flying immortal dance. The flying immortal dance was a movement technique. It was similar to Su Yuexi's demonic shadow movement technique. The flying immortal dance and the flying immortal sword technique were used together. Under the flying immortal force field, it was very mysterious. In the flying celestial force field, the crowd could only see countless figures of the flying celestials flying towards Gulwankong. It looked like a group of fairies were dancing gracefully, performing a dance from the fairy world. It was intoxicating. The fairies looked elegant, but they actually contained extremely sharp killing intent. If one was not careful, they would be killed. What a powerful, bewitching power! Chu Mu secretly exclaimed. Qin Aoxian's swordsmanship and body movement were similar to Su Yuexi's. However, they looked different on the surface. One was an immortal while the other was a demon. However, the essence of their techniques was the same. Chu Mu was sure that he was not mistaken. Perhaps Qin Aoxian's line and Su Yuexi's line had an unusual connection. However, compared to Qin Aoxian's movement and sword skills, what attracted Chu Mu more was Gulwankong's chaotic space force field and the movement and sword skills he displayed. All of these gave Chu Mu a strong feeling. Under the chaotic space force field, the sword art that Gulwankong performed was called the chaotic space sword art. The chaotic space sword chi shot out, and each of the sword chi traveled through the cracks in space. They were invisible and hard to detect and hard to deal with. Many flying immortals were shattered by the chaotic space sword chi. The movement was called the chaotic space step. With each step, Gulwankong's figure flashed. He could appear anywhere in the chaotic space force field. Qin Aoxian's attack would either be cancelled out by the chaotic space sword chi or miss. However, Qin Aoxian was not easy to deal with. She changed her sword art slightly. Each of the flying immortals seemed to have the ability to lock on to Gulwankong. No matter where Gulwankong appeared, they would fly over with light and fast speed. The flying immortal force field and the chaotic space force field. The flying immortal dance and the chaotic space step. The flying immortal sword art and the chaotic space sword art. Qin Aoxian and Gulwankong. Exquisite sword art, exquisite movement and movement. Exquisite control. It was an exciting battle. Chu Mu's eyes were fixed on Gulwankong. He couldn't move his eyes away. There were traces of silver light swimming in his pupils. The spatial rule power in his spiritual world flashed with silver light. The secret codex of the void-breaking codex beside the spatial rule power vibrated at an even faster speed. It drove the spatial rule power to speed up the refinement. Gulwankong's attainment in the spatial rule power was much better than Chu Mu's. After all, he was a true disciple of the chaotic Sky Emperor. He had cultivated for many years. Compared to Chu Mu, who had comprehended the spatial rule power on his own before he got the secret codex of the void-breaking codex, he was much better. Moreover, even if Chu Mu got the inheritance of the secret codex of the void-breaking codex, it was only an inheritance of a secret codex. To some extent, it couldn't be compared to a complete and orderly lineage that was taught by a great emperor. Hence, when Chu Mu saw Gu Luankong using the spatial rule power, he understood, absorbed and turned it into his own, increasing his attainment in the spatial rule power. The difference in attainment in the spatial rule power was obvious. Chu Mu was like a sponge that kept absorbing knowledge. All kinds of comprehensions kept flashing in his mind. So, the spatial rule power can be used like this. So, there is such a way. It was like looking at flowers on horseback. Chu Mu's comprehension of the spatial rule power was getting deeper and deeper. The control of power was only one aspect of cultivation. The application of power could be considered another aspect. To a certain extent, the control and application of power were interrelated. Chu Mu's spatial rule power had reached the peak of the refinement realm because of the refinement of the secret codex of the void-breaking codex. His own comprehension wasn't enough. Of course, if he was given some time, he would be able to comprehend all kinds of applications under the peak of the refinement realm. However, it would take a long time. Gu Luankong's battle gave Chu Mu a great opportunity to improve himself. The battle between Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong had reached its climax. One of them was magnificent while the other was unparalleled. Both of them had their own strength. Facing Qin Aoxian, Gu Luankong was also prepared. Both of them unleashed their sword force. Their sword force had reached level 5, causing waves of exclamations. Among the 100 monstrous geniuses, every one of them had mastered sword force. They were at least at level 2, and most of them were at level 3. Not many of them had reached level 4, and only 3 of them had reached level 5. Gu Luankong, Qin Aoxian, and Chu Mu. The more he watched Gu Luankong's battle, the more Chu Mu comprehended. Countless fragments of comprehensions gathered together, turning into a raging torrent that kept attacking. The void-breaking secret tome shone with a bright silver light and was released. It swept across the entire spiritual world, causing it to shake crazily. The power of the rules of space also shone with a bright silver light, vibrating at the same frequency as the void-breaking secret tome. Chu Mu's eyes were filled with silver light. He quickly closed his eyes to avoid attracting attention. He tried his best to control his aura, but a silver storm swept up in his spiritual world. It rumbled loudly, and the terrifying aura seemed like it was going to tear the world apart. Luckily, Chu Mu's spiritual world was many times more vast than a swordsman of the same level. It had also been strengthened time and time again, making it extremely tough and indestructible. That was why it wasn't destroyed by the Silver Storm. The Silver Storm surrounded Chu Mu's power of the rules of space. The strong killing force kept refining the power of the rules of space, causing his mastery of the rules of space to increase bit by bit. He was about to break through to the subtle realm. Chu Mu didn't know anything that was happening outside. He was completely immersed in it. The battle between Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong had come to an end. Both of them were extremely powerful, and it seemed like they were evenly matched. Whether it was using the Flying Fairy Force Field or the Chaotic Space Force Field, the Flying Fairy Sword Technique, the Flying Fairy Dance, or the Chaotic Space Sword Technique, the Chaotic Space Steps, they all consumed a lot of energy. After an intense battle, although Gu Luankong had a very high mastery of his own power, the various sword techniques, body movements, and force fields also consumed a lot of energy. He wouldn't be able to last for long. Senior Brother Gu, I have created a unique skill. Please enlighten me. Qin Aoxian dispersed the Flying Fairy Force Field. She floated in the air, and her cold aura spread out in the air. Her white robe fluttered in the air, and she looked like a fairy descending. She opened her cherry lips and spoke in a cold voice. Everyone was shocked. A unique skill created by oneself. There were 3 levels of unique skills. Even the lowest level of unique skills wouldn't be any weaker than a Tian-level sword technique. The difficulty of creating a unique skill wouldn't be any easier than creating a Tian-level sword technique. Creating a sword technique wasn't easy in the first place. It required a deep and unique understanding of sword technique. Moreover, one had to practice many sword techniques and be knowledgeable about sword technique. With their current level, it wasn't difficult to create a Huang level or Xian level sword technique. It would take a long time to create an Earth level sword technique, and they might not even succeed. As for creating a Tian level sword technique, that was just a dream. While many geniuses thought that it was still a dream, Qin Aoxian had done it. Everyone thought that she wouldn't lie or play tricks on this kind of thing. Junior sister Qin do it, Gu Luankong said. He also withdrew the chaotic space force field. He didn't hide the curiosity on his face. This unique skill is called Flying Fairy Sky Slashing Sword. For some reason, Qin Aoxian's voice sounded even colder. This is the first time I've used it since I created it. Senior brother Gu, be careful. As Qin Aoxian finished speaking, her body floated up into the sky. Her white robe fluttered in the wind. She slowly raised the flying fairy sword in her hand. Her aura kept increasing, making her seem even more otherworldly. In the otherworldly aura, endless sharpness was born. It grew stronger and stronger. The wind blew and the clouds moved. The world seemed to change. Everyone's eyes were unconsciously attracted to Qin Aoxian and the flying fairy sword in her hand. Strands of white light appeared on the flying fairy sword. It flowed and covered the entire flying fairy sword. Next, Qin Aoxian waved her hand and the flying fairy sword flew out of her hand. It flew higher into the sky and released an even brighter white light. Clouds surrounded it, making it look like a fairyland. Slash! She opened her cherry lips and pointed her finger downwards. The flying fairy sword in the sky suddenly shook and released a melodious sword chime. The chime reverberated through the world. When it reached everyone's ears, it immediately made them tremble. It was as if they had fallen into a strange illusion. Chapter 1291. Streaks of white sword light appeared around the flying fairy sword. They were densely packed and seemed to be in a mess. However, they vaguely formed a flying shadow that traveled through time and space. The ethereal aura was mesmerizing. It was as if they were entering a fairyland and couldn't pull themselves out. At the same time, each streak of white sword light gave out a terrifying aura. It made people's expressions change and their hearts tremble. It was as if a terrifying sword was hanging above their heads. Once it fell, they would be cut in half and their souls would be destroyed. Some of the lower-ranked high seats were shocked. They groaned and blood flowed out from the corner of their mouth. They had already suffered internal injuries. Terrifying aura. Terrifying unique skill. Flying fairy sky slashing sword. Just this aura alone shows that the power of this unique skill has already surpassed the level of some normal unique skills. Great Emperor Bo Su exclaimed. The other two great emperors nodded. Unique skills were divided into 3 levels: normal unique skills, advanced unique skills, and supreme unique skills. The difference between each level of unique skill was huge. Even between unique skills of the same level, there were differences in strength. Qin Aoxian's flying fairy heaven slashing sword was undoubtedly one of the stronger unique skills. However, no matter how outstanding a unique skill was, it could not be compared with the most ordinary unique skills. However, Qin Aoxian wasn't even 100 years old. When many people were still working hard to cultivate a normal unique skill, she had already created a powerful normal unique skill. She was miles ahead of her peers. As soon as Qin Aoxian finished speaking, she pointed her sword at Gu Luankong on the ground. Suddenly, the flying fairy sword in the sky vibrated and let out a melodious sound. The surrounding white sword light also vibrated along with the flying fairy sword. Every streak of white sword light let out a melodious sound. Whooshing sounds were heard. Streaks of white sword light slashed down from the sky. Celestial sounds were heard and celestial chi lingered around. The sword light was extremely sharp. Every streak of white sword light seemed to be able to cut open the heavens and earth. It made the void tremble. Even though they weren't the target, the high seats were still shocked and even trembling. Suyueshi's face darkened. She realized the difference between her and Qin Aoxian. She clenched her teeth and her eyes glinted coldly. Gu Luankong raised his head and looked at the sky. Countless white sword lights were reflected in his eyes. His pupils seemed to be filled with light. Celestial music kept entering his ears. It was as if he was going to enter a celestial realm. However, he knew that it was not a celestial realm. It was actually hell. Taking a deep breath, Gu Luankong's body was surrounded by a strong ripple of spatial rule power. He used the sword in his hand to slowly draw a circle diagonally above him. His movements were slow, but steady power was brewing within it. After a circle, his wrist suddenly shook and the sword spun rapidly. It was as if he was drawing circles within the circle. A vortex appeared under the sword. This was a vortex formed by the power of space law. Emperor Luan Tian's lost art, Void Devour. Emperor Bo Su's eyes were sharp. He immediately recognized the lost art Gu Luankong was using. A terrifying suction force suddenly exploded from the vortex. It affected the surrounding space and caused it to vibrate slightly. The white sword lights were instantly affected by the suction force. They were all sucked into the vortex and disappeared. They could not attack Gu Luankong at all. The power of the flying fairy sky slashing sword was used up. All the white sword lights were sucked into the vortex. The flying fairy sword light dissipated and fell. Qin Aoxian grabbed the sword in her hand. She had almost used up all her power. She slowly fell. Gu Luankong's sword shook. The Void Devourer was instantly destroyed and disappeared into the void. It disappeared into the world without a trace. Junior Sister Qin, you are indeed magnificent, Gu Luankong said seriously. Senior Brother Gu, you are flattering me. This move still needs more improvement. Qin Aoxian bowed slightly and admitted defeat. Even the magnificent Qin Aoxian was not Gu Luankong's opponent. This further proved that Gu Luankong was unparalleled in the world. People could not help but sigh. Who could be Gu Luankong's opponent? Unparalleled in the world. This man will definitely become the leader of the younger generation of the human race. He will be the main force to fight against the foreign race. Great Emperor Sisu said. The other two martial monarchs agreed with him too. Gu Luankong was indeed unparalleled in the world. After the battle between Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong, the second round of the fourth stage came to an end. The third round was also the last round of the fourth stage. It was also the last round of the Heaven Youth list. After half an hour of rest, the third round began. As the last round of the Heaven Youth list, it was an extremely important round. Everyone paid more attention to it. In the next 15 minutes, everyone was digesting what they had seen from the battles. Only Chu Mu was an exception, because he was trying his best to comprehend the new inheritance of the Breaking Void secret manual. He was trying his best to convert it into his strength and improve himself. After a few breaths of careful consideration, the 100th Supreme Seat Genius chose his opponent again. This time, he was even more careful in choosing his opponent. This time, he wanted stability. As long as he could defeat his opponent successfully, it was fine even if he could only advance by one supreme seat. There was a difference in luck between each of the 100 spots on the Heaven Youth list. The higher the ranking, the stronger the luck and the greater the glory. There was an obvious difference between the 100th and the 99th place. Because of the careful treatment and careful selection of opponents, the third round of the Supreme Seat Challenge was even more intense and exciting. When the geniuses met their match, the battles would be longer and there would be more moves to be used. After all, after going through the first 2 rounds of battles and watching the battles between the other geniuses, everyone had more or less gained something. Their strength had also improved to a certain extent, whether it was in terms of swordsmanship, movement techniques, etc., or battle technique. After the increase in strength, the third round of battles would be even more exciting. When the geniuses met their match, they would be able to fight to their heart's content. The duration of each battle would be extended by a lot. Unknowingly, it would be easier for Chu Mu to comprehend the new inheritance. The battles continued one after another as the geniuses performed to their heart's content. Apart from using some self-damaging secret techniques, each of the geniuses used their full strength. They didn't use any special secret treasures or self-damaging secret technique. Even if it wasn't a rule, it was still a rule. In short, each of the geniuses was very conscious. Ze challenged his opponent and successfully won, obtaining the 15th Supreme Seat. Soon, it was the 18th Supreme Seat's turn. He was originally the 4th Supreme Seat, but he lost to Chu Mu's sword and fell to the 18th Supreme Seat. His opponent was the 6th Supreme Seat's monster. This was because he wasn't Chu Mu's match, and he wasn't confident in defeating Su Yueshi. As for Yang Zhantian, Qin Aoxian, and Gu Luankong, they weren't confident either after watching their battles. This was the last round, and it was related to the final ranking of the Heaven Youth list. They couldn't be careless or take risk. They could only seek stability. Bai Yu continued to use his best mental attacks and fought the 6th Supreme Seat's monster in the spiritual world. The 6th Supreme Seat's mental power was also very strong, but compared to Bai Yu, there was still a gap. Therefore, after an intense battle, he lost to Bai Yu. Bai Yu successfully obtained the 6th Supreme Seat and returned to the top 10. The following battles were even more exciting. Everyone was mesmerized. It was the 10th Supreme Seat's turn again. Lian Hongyun looked at the 9 Supreme Seats in front of him. He naturally wanted the 1st Supreme Seat the most. Unfortunately, he knew that he was no match for Gu Luankong. As for the 2nd and 3rd Supreme Seats, he also knew that he wasn't their match, so he didn't challenge them. The 4th Supreme Seat's Chu Mu and the 5th Supreme Seat's Su Yueshi were both defeated by their swords. He wasn't confident in fighting them again. Lian Hongyun also wasn't sure about the 6th Supreme Seat's attack patterns. He took a step back and chose the 7th Supreme Seat's monster to be safe. The 7th Supreme Seat's monster wasn't weak either. After an intense battle with Lian Hongyun was forced to use his ultimate skill, the Refining Cloud 9 Tribulations Sword. The Refining Cloud 9 Tribulations Sword was a peerless ultimate skill. Unfortunately, Lian Hongyun had only mastered the first 3 swords, which were equivalent to ordinary ultimate skills. However, its power was still at the peak of ordinary ultimate skills. It was very powerful. It was reasonable for him to defeat the 7th Supreme Seat's monster. The 9th Supreme Seat's monster looked at it and gave up. The 8th Supreme Seat's monster did the same. The 7th Supreme Seat's monster challenged the 8th Supreme Seat's Fang Tianxiong and defeated her. Next, it was the 5th Supreme Seat's monster, Su Yueshi's turn. Su Yueshi's incomparably cold gaze was like a blade that flitted past Chu Mu, as if wanting to cut him apart. However, Chu Mu didn't seem to notice and didn't move at all. He didn't react at all, causing Su Yueshi to be filled with hatred. Su Yueshi then looked at Yang Zhantian and Qin Aoxian's face. There was a trace of struggle in her eyes, but she soon calmed down and gave up. She didn't want to give up, but she knew that she wasn't Qin Aoxian's match. As for Gu Luankong, it was needless to say. It was the 4th Supreme Seat's turn to challenge Chu Mu. Everyone started to guess. Would he choose Yang Zhantian or Qin Aoxian? He's probably not Qin Aoxian's match. I think he'll choose Yang Zhantian. Maybe he'll choose Gu Luankong. Are you kidding? Gu Luankong is unparalleled in the world. How can Chu Mu be his match? The 3 Supreme Seats were also guessing who Chu Mu would choose. In the end, they felt that he could either give up or choose Yang Zhantian. As for Qin Aoxian and Gu Luankong, they were both very strong. According to Chu Mu's strength, he wasn't their match at all. Chu Mu's gaze swept across Yang Zhantian's face, ignoring Yang Zhantian's threatening eyes. It also swept across Qin Aoxian's face, ignoring her cold and empty eyes. Finally, it landed on Gu Luankong's face. When their gazes collided, sparks seemed to flash between their gazes. This scene caused everyone to be shocked. Could it be that Chu Mu was planning on choosing Gu Wankong as his opponent? Chapter 1292. Battle intent rose from Gu Wankong's body. It felt as if Gu Wankong had just woken up from a deep sleep. It was a strange feeling. It felt as if the Gu Wankong that fought with Qin Aoxian was not the real Gu Wankong. In fact, the Gu Wankong that fought with Qin Aoxian did show his true strength. However, Gu Wankong was more interested in Chu Mu. Hence, his attitude towards Chu Mu was different from how he treated Qin Aoxian. "Let's compete with sword skills," Gu Wankong said. He did not give Chu Mu a chance to reject or agree. He immediately attacked with his sword. The air seemed to have been sliced apart by the sword. It was extremely fast and sharp. Basic sword skill. Basic sword skill that was infused with the rules of wind. As soon as Gu Wankong attacked, Chu Mu reacted immediately. He swung his sword forward and blocked the tip of Gu Wankong's sword. When the two swords clashed, the power exploded and changed instantly. In the blink of an eye, the sword light flashed dozens of times. However, the two of them did not move at all. Gu Wankong's sword skills were very profound. He was even better than Lian Hongyun and Su Yueshi. When Chu Mu fought with him, it was hard for him to gain the upper hand. However, Chu Mu's sword skills were still better than Gu Wankong's. Gu Wankong was gradually at a disadvantage. His sword skills changed. Every attack became silent and the space seemed to be retreating automatically. The speed of his sword increased by a lot. It was as if there was nothing it could not penetrate. The tip of the sword could appear at any angle. Gu Wankong used the rules of space. The power of his sword skills increased a lot. He was now on par with Chu Mu. The change in Gu Wankong's sword skills was exactly what Chu Mu wanted. It allowed Chu Mu to get closer and experience Gu Wankong's use of the rules of space. The Sky Chaos Clan was well versed in the rules of space. Gu Wankong had been immersed in it for many years and was naturally talented. His attainments in the rules of space were profound, which made him the perfect target for Chu Mu to learn from. With all kinds of comprehension, Chu Mu's mastery of the spatial law had reached the early stage of the refined spatial law. On the other hand, Gu Wankong's mastery of the spatial law had reached the late stage of the refined spatial law, which was better than Chu Mu's. In terms of application, it was better than Chu Mu's. As he fought, Chu Mu continued to comprehend and absorb the various inheritances of the void-breaking secret manual. Gradually, he gained a deeper understanding of them. All of a sudden, Chu Mu's lightning-like sword skills changed into Gu Wankong's sword skills. The space around Gu Wankong's sword also started to move away, which made Chu Mu's sword speed a few times faster. It was much faster, and it could attack Gu Wankong from any angle. What? Chu Mu has mastered a fourth style of sword skills, and he has even mastered the rules of space. It seems like his mastery of the rules of space has reached the refined spatial law level. However, looking at his sword skills now, they seem a little rusty. Could it be that he has just mastered this style of sword skills? Great Emperor Bo Su asked curiously. His guess wasn't accurate. Long ago, Chu Mu was already able to integrate the rules of space into his sword skills. However, compared to Gu Wankong's sword skills, it was a little rough. Now that he was fighting with Gu Wankong, he was absorbing the strengths of Gu Wankong to improve his mastery of the space sword skills. Previously, he had used the rules of space once. However, it didn't seem to be as profound as it is now. He should have just broken through not too long ago. He is another super genius. The middle-aged great emperor sighed. Chu Mu performed the space sword skills and fought with Gu Wankong fiercely. Gu Wankong's eyes were filled with interest, and his battle intent was getting clearer. Suddenly, Gu Wankong's sword shook. A sword shadow seemed to be peeled off from the sword in his hand. The sword shadow circled around and attacked Chu Mu from another angle under Gu Wankong's sword skills. It carried the rules of space and appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Chu Mu wanted to learn it, but it was a unique skill of Gulwankong's. Without the corresponding inheritance, it was impossible for him to learn it. If this skill was performed by someone else, they might not be able to do anything to Chu Mu. However, Gulwankong's mastery of the sword skills was very high. He was only slightly weaker than Chu Mu. When he performed it, Chu Mu immediately felt pressured. Left with no choice, Chu Mu could only take out the undying sword and perform the dual sword skill to fight with Gulwankong. Once the dual sword skill was performed, Chu Mu's strength multiplied. His usage of the rules of space became more and more profound. It was as if each of his attacks was getting stronger. Even a monster like Gulwankong was shocked. After dozens of attacks, the power of Chu Mu's space sword skills increased tremendously. He was able to suppress Gulwankong. Gulwankong is actually being suppressed. Unbelievable! Exclamations came one after another. In the battle of sword skills, Chu Mu was able to suppress Gulwankong. Everyone was shocked. Gulwankong was unparalleled in the world. Hence, many people thought that Gulwankong's sword skills should be unparalleled among his peers. Chu Mu overturned their thoughts. Brother Chu's sword skills are indeed profound. I admit that I am not as good as you. Gulwankong said, however, sword skills are only a part of one's strength. As soon as he finished speaking, Gulwankong immediately performed the chaotic space sword skill and chaotic space step skill. The chaotic space sword skill was at the heaven level upper level. Its power was at the peak of the heaven level upper level. It was extremely powerful. When combined with the chaotic space step skill, it was even more mysterious. Once it was performed, Chu Mu lost his advantage. Chu Mu cultivated the ancient archaic sword skill. Although it was not weak, compared to the chaotic space sword skill, there was still a huge gap. Even when he performed the dual sword skill, he was still unable to suppress Gulwankong. Instead, he was gradually being suppressed by Gulwankong. The situation was not looking good. I knew it. How could the unparalleled chaotic space be suppressed by Chu Mu? In terms of cultivation, Gulwankong was at the late stage of the third sky of Nirvana realm, while Chu Mu was only at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. Chu Mu cultivated the divine wilderness sword essence, but Gulwankong's cultivation was not weak either. Chu Mu's cultivation was not as good as Gulwankong's. Luckily, Chu Mu also cultivated his body cultivation. With his body cultivation and chi cultivation, in terms of close combat, his strength was not much weaker than Gulwankong's. However, Gulwankong's chaotic space step skill and chaotic space sword skill were of high quality. They were powerful and exquisite. When used together, they were even more mysterious. Gulwankong had been cultivating for many years. He had a deep understanding of the chaotic space step and chaotic space sword skill. In this aspect, he was much better than Chu Mu. Under the dual sword skill, Chu Mu gradually became more defensive and less offensive. He was suppressed by Gulwankong. The chaotic space step skill made Gulwankong's body unpredictable. He could appear at any angle and attack. The chaotic space sword chi of the chaotic space sword skill shot into the air and disappeared. However, it could appear from any angle and direction at any time and shoot towards Chu Mu. It was very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, the chaotic space sword chi was extremely powerful. It could pierce through everything. Chu Mu was very cautious. He spread out his two swords. Ancient sword chi shot out and the earth-shaking force was activated. He destroyed the chaotic space sword chi one after another. What a pity! If he had cultivated a heaven-level upper-rank sword skill, he would be able to fight against Gulwankong. Although he was suppressed, Chu Mu's expression was as cold as ice. He did not panic and changed his sword skill style again. The fifth style of sword skill. Suddenly, Great Emperor Rong Su lost his voice. There was someone who had mastered 5 styles of sword skill. It was unbelievable. The other 2 Great Emperor's eyes almost popped out. Chu Mu's true talent is probably in sword skill. After great Emperor Rong Su exclaimed, he said with a serious expression. Geniuses all had their own strength. For example, Gu Luankong was most proficient in the power of space. The two swords danced. The speed of the swords seemed slow, but it was like flowing water. It was like trees blooming endlessly. It was as stable as a rock. It was also like the wind blowing past. It was like the ever-changing clouds. Gu Luankong's chaotic space sword chi was blocked, deflected and shattered. Using softness to overcome hardness, combining hardness and softness, under Chu Mu's sword technique, it was performed to the extreme. The sword light seemed to transform into a belt of light that circled the surroundings. Su Yueshi's eyes lit up. From Chu Mu's current sword technique, she associated it with her own Sky Devil Transformation sword technique. She instantly felt that she had gained some understanding. Unknowingly, her understanding of Sky Devil Transformation sword technique had deepened by another level. Not only Su Yueshi, but the other geniuses all understood tacitly when they saw Chu Mu use his sword technique. They all had some comprehension, and their hearts were filled with amazement. Chu Mu's sword technique seemed to be at his fingertip. It was completely natural. Different from other geniuses, it didn't stick to one style or one form. Instead, it could transform into a myriad of forms and encompass everything. Within one sword, it could be violent, gentle, sharp, or steady. It was practically the culmination of sword technique. It was incomparable. Under Chu Mu's sword skill, the ancient archaic sword skill was performed to its fullest. It complemented with the basic sword skill. All kinds of essence were displayed by Chu Mu. Allowing Gu Luankong to continuously attack Chu Mu was like a reef that was hit by thousands of waves, standing tall for eternity. Gu Luankong was surprised. He didn't expect Chu Mu's sword skill to be so exquisite. It couldn't be described with words. Even if he were to fight with Chu Mu again, Gu Luankong could still learn something from Chu Mu's sword skill and integrate it into his own sword skill. It made his sword skill level improve slightly. I didn't expect to see such a monstrous sword skill in my life. If Gu Luankong is unparalleled in the world, then Chu Mu is unparalleled in the real sword skill, Great Emperor Bo Su sighed. All-encompassing sword skill, unparalleled in the real sword skill. Chu Mu is worthy of this title. It was a great honor to be acknowledged as unparalleled in the real sword skill by 3 great emperors. If the news spread, it would cause a huge uproar. Since ancient times, there were very few geniuses who could become great emperors. Every great emperor, even the most ordinary one, was the pillar of the human race. They had a high status and honor. Every great emperor was knowledgeable and experienced a lot. In their lives, they had seen hundreds of geniuses. However, there were very few who could be praised by them. Now there was another one, Chu Mu. Chapter 1293. My foresight is correct. Gu Luankong stopped attacking and smiled at Chu Mu from afar. What he meant was that with the strength Chu Mu had displayed, Chu Mu was already qualified to be his opponent. At the beginning, he had treated Chu Mu as an opponent and had not made a mistake. He was very happy. My foresight is correct too. Chu Mu smiled and lowered his swords. Gu Luankong seemed to be everywhere during the battle, but he didn't seem to have moved at all. I look forward to your growth in the future. I hope that you can become my true opponent in the future and let me fight you with my full strength. Gu Luankong said again. What he meant was that although his eyes weren't wrong, the current Chu Mu was still a bit inexperienced compared to him. However, this also meant that if Chu Mu was given some time to grow in the future, he may be able to match him and truly fight him. A person who truly possessed the heart of a powerhouse would not be afraid of any challenges, nor would they be afraid of any talented opponents. Chu Mu is going to lose. Since Gu Luankong said so, it means that he's going to defeat Chu Mu. Unknowingly, everyone became excited. You've also mastered the power of the rules of space and have reached the profound level. However, you should have just broken through not long ago. If you join the Chaotic Sky faction, you will be able to get the inheritance of the Chaotic Sky faction. It will be helpful for your cultivation of the rules of space. Gu Luankong smiled and said, "Now, I'll let you experience the unique skill of the Chaotic Sky faction, the Chaotic Sky Force Field." In a sense, the Force Field was also a type of unique skill. As soon as he finished speaking, traces of silver light spread out from Gu Luankong's body and disappeared into the void. Silently, the area within a few thousand meters was covered, including Chu Mu. Immediately, Chu Mu felt that the power of the rules of heaven and earth in his spiritual world was suppressed. Only the power of the rules of space that had reached the profound level could resist, but it was also suppressed. The laws of wood have been suppressed by 30%, while the other laws have been suppressed by 50% or even 80%. Chu Mu could not help but frown. The chaotic space force field was simply too frightening. All sorts of heaven and earth law energies were suppressed and weakened in such a manner. Their might was greatly reduced, making it difficult for them to display much of their strength. Not only were the various heaven and earth nomological powers being suppressed, Chu Mu also felt that the divine wilderness sword essence in his body had become somewhat chaotic, as though countless shattered spaces had appeared within the sword essence, splitting it apart. Although he could still circulate it, every circulation became more obscure, and the time needed to circulate it was prolonged, affecting his strength. With his powerful divine sense, Chu Mu could feel that the space around him had also become very chaotic. When he used his sword skills, it was very likely that they would be affected by the chaotic space and be weakened. The chaotic space force field was so powerful. No wonder Gu Luankong would say something like that. If Chu Mu did not receive the new inheritance of the Breaking Void secret manual and did not have the time to study it properly, he could only admit defeat. Because under the chaotic space force field, his strength had been greatly reduced. On the other hand, Gu Luankong's laws of space had been strengthened, and he knew all the chaos within the chaotic space force field like the back of his hand. Not only had his sword skills been weakened, but they had also complemented each other. Only Qin Aoxian's flying deity force field could compete with it. The chaotic space force field is indeed powerful, but just when everyone thought that Chu Mu would admit defeat, he made a turn. After he said those two words, traces of the power of the laws of space appeared from Chu Mu's body. They became stronger and stronger. Then, traces of silver light, each as sharp as a sword light, spread out slowly with a sharpness that could tear everything apart. Wherever the silver light passed, the space seemed to be cut open, leaving behind traces. This is... The three great emperors were dumbfounded. Gu Luankong's face was filled with shock. Just when everyone thought that Chu Mu was going to lose, he did something shocking again. It seemed slow, but it was actually very fast. In just a few breaths' time, the silver light had shot out 1,000 meters away and disappeared into the space. One could vaguely see that there was a silver light that was several times sharper than the sword light swimming around. It seemed to have cut open the space and isolated it from the outside world, forming an independent space. Gu Luankong was also wrapped in it. Force field. You have also mastered a space force field. Gu Luankong was still in shock. He thought that he was right. Previously, Chu Mu had only displayed the power of the laws of space once. However, Gu Luankong, who was well versed in the power of the laws of space, could tell that Chu Mu's power of the laws of space was only in the microscopic realm. At most, it was the peak of the microscopic realm. Now that he had reached the early stage of the microscopic realm, it was obvious that he had made a breakthrough here. In the previous battle, he could also feel that Chu Mu's early stage of the microscopic realm was not stable. It was true that he had just made a breakthrough not long ago. As the battle progressed, it gradually stabilized. Gu Luankong was very clear that it was impossible to cultivate a force field without reaching the microscopic realm. Obviously, the force field that Chu Mu was using right now was only a few days old. Thinking about it, Gul Wankong could not help but be even more shocked. Even if it was him, he would not be able to cultivate such a profound force field in just a few days. That was a force field that could compete with his chaotic space force field. It was not some normal force field. In other words, Chu Mu had actually obtained some inheritance related to the power of space. After he had reached the microscopic realm, he immediately inherited it and started to cultivate it. However, no matter what, he had mastered it in just a few days. Gul Wankong was still very surprised. Very well. Your force field is actually capable of contending against my chaotic space force field. This is no small matter. Furthermore, like my chaotic space force field, your force field is of the spatial lineage. However, your force field is extremely sharp and different from my chaotic space force field. Gul Wankong sensed a little bit and said all kinds of characteristics of Chu Mu's force field. Brother Chu, what kind of force field is this? Void-breaking force field. Chu Mu answered. Void-breaking force field was one of the new inheritances of the void-breaking secret manual when Chu Mu's control of the power of space had reached the microscopic realm. Because of the time and energy, Chu Mu focused on the void-breaking force field. During the battle with Gul Wankong, he improved his mastery of the power of space. In the end, under Gul Wankong's chaotic space force field, he got a slight chance and successfully broke through. Finally, he had mastered the void-breaking force field. Although he had mastered it, it was only the beginning. It was still very rough. However, Chu Mu had no choice but to use it to fight against the chaotic space force field. He could also improve through fighting against it. Gul Wankong's chaotic space force field covered a few thousand meters. Chu Mu's void-breaking force field only covered a few thousand meters. This was the difference between someone who had just mastered it and someone who had mastered it. Luckily, the void-breaking force field could barely fight against the chaotic space force field. Chu Mu's suppression was greatly reduced. The power of wood was suppressed to 90% of its original power, while the other powers were suppressed to 80 and 70%. As for the power of space, it was not suppressed at all. Moreover, the power of the divine wilderness sword essence had also recovered. Moreover, because of the void-breaking force field, Chu Mu's power of space was not only free from the suppression, but also increased. The divine wilderness sword essence also contained a trace of void-breaking force field. It could tear through everything, regardless of whether it was hard or soft, solid or void. Under the chaotic space force field, Gul Wankong used the chaotic space sword art and the chaotic space step. With the support of the chaotic space force field, his sword art became stronger and his footwork became more mysterious. On the other hand, although Chu Mu's power of space was increased, he did not cultivate any space sword art. He only had the ancient sword art. However, the power of the lightning force field was also reduced. It was only 80% of its original power. This caused the power of the ancient sword art to decrease significantly. However, with the addition of a trace of void-breaking force field, Chu Mu's sword was even sharper. Gul Wankong did not dare to face it head-on. Under this situation, Chu Mu, who had used the dual sword art, was once again at a disadvantage. He was suppressed by Gul Wankong. However, he was still standing firmly like a pine tree. He allowed Gul Wankong to attack him. Gul Wankong did not use the void-swallowing technique because it was a defensive technique. It was specially used to absorb powerful attack. It was not suitable for him to use it now. However, this did not mean that Gul Wankong did not have any other tricks up his sleeve. After attacking for a long time, Gul Wankong could not completely suppress Chu Mu. Instead, he could feel that Chu Mu's void-breaking force field was increasing. The power of Chu Mu's sword art was increasing as well. He is so tenacious. He is still not defeated. Does he still have a chance to defeat Gul Wankong? With the power he has displayed, he is not inferior to Qin Aoxian. This is shocking. Gul Wankong knew that if this continued, it would only give Chu Mu the chance to increase his power. He would not be able to defeat him. Hence, he stopped attacking again and appeared in the distance. Without saying anything, Gu Luankong slightly leaned forward. The sword in his hand stopped in front of him. The power of the space force field vibrated intensely. Then, he slashed forward. Chu Mu's eyebrows suddenly twitched. A strong sense of danger shook his mind. The other geniuses also felt their minds shake. They felt that Gu Luankong's sword seemed to have sliced apart the space under the sword. The shock wave spread to their side, directly slicing apart their bodies and souls. The feeling of death invaded their bodies. Sky Disorder's elite technique, space splitting slash. Although his cultivation was not high enough and he could not unleash the full power of the technique, space splitting slash was still as powerful as an elite technique under Gu Luankong's sword. Unknowingly, Chu Mu saw that Gu Luankong's slash had sliced the space in front of him. The terrifying power spread out in an instant. Even the void-breaking force field could not stop it. Instantly, Chu Mu felt as if his body was sliced in half. Even his soul felt the pain of being sliced. Without hesitation, Lin Fan released the void-breaking sword Qi and gathered it on the sky/sword. With a slash, it was as if the world was sliced in half. The power of the void-breaking force merged with the void-breaking sword Qi, causing the power of the void-breaking sword Qi to multiply. It was as powerful as an elite technique and went against the power of space splitting slash. Chapter 1294. The sizzling sound was like water dripping into boiling oil. Under Chu Mu's sword, the void-pierced sword Qi clashed with Gu Luankong's ultimate technique, space splitting slash. A terrifying spatial energy ripple spread out, spreading out in all directions and shaking the void. Every genius was affected. Qin Aoxian and the other geniuses frowned and released their energy to disperse the incoming spatial energy ripple. Those geniuses who were weaker had to use most of their power to defend themselves. Their faces changed and their bodies trembled. Although the supreme seat was magical, it did not have the ability to defend against the impact of energy. Perhaps it did, but it was not activated. The geniuses could only defend themselves against the impact of energy. Therefore, the geniuses who were hit by the impact of Chu Mu and Gu Luankong's spatial energy were all pale and shocked. In the void, black cracks could be seen with the naked eye. Although it was just a flash, it was enough to make one's heart jump. The powerful space-splitting slash was blocked by Chu Mu in the end. When Gu Luankong was fighting with Qin Aoxian, he had only used the defensive skill, void swallowing. He did not use any offensive skills. Therefore, it was the first time that everyone had seen Gu Luankong's offensive skill. Even so, he was still unable to defeat Chu Mu. Everyone couldn't help but view Chu Mu in a higher light. Gu Luankong was also surprised. Even space-splitting slash could not defeat Chu Mu. Chu Mu was indeed difficult to deal with. However, such an opponent was more exciting. In terms of sword skills, he could not suppress Chu Mu. In terms of battle force, he only had a slight advantage but not an absolute advantage. Moreover, Chu Mu was able to improve himself rapidly during the battle. This was even more shocking. Now that his unique skill could not defeat Chu Mu, everyone started to guess what Gu Luankong was going to do next. What kind of skills did he have to defeat Chu Mu? Everyone thought hard and thought that they would replace Gu Luankong. However, they could not think of how to defeat Chu Mu. He had already used all of his sword skills and force field. I think he is done for. Chu Mu is really stubborn. I can't even defeat him. The three emperors looked on with interest. What would Gu Luankong do next? Gu Luankong didn't say anything. He was thinking, and he was also recovering his strength. The battle earlier had consumed a lot of his strength, and Chu Mu had also consumed a lot of his strength. He was also recovering. The two of them retracted their force field. Whether it was the chaotic space force field or the void-shattering force field, they were both powerful force field. Using them would not only consume sword origin, it would also consume physical strength and mental energy. The stronger the force field, the more energy it would consume. The two of them remained motionless. While recovering their strength, they were also thinking about how to defeat each other. Defeating the other party wasn't just about fighting for the #1 spot on the Heaven Azure leaderboard. Defeating the other party was also a way for him to train himself and refine his essence, energy, and spirit. It would be of great help to his future cultivation. No matter what, both sides had a reason to defeat the other. Although the two of them didn't fight and were recovering their strength, the atmosphere was tense. It was as if the air had frozen, causing everyone's hearts to be filled with thoughts and guesses. I have thought about it, and there is only one last move left. If you are still not defeated. Gulwankong suddenly opened his mouth. However, he only finished half of his sentence, and it piqued Chu Mu's interest. He wanted to know what other moves Gulwankong had. Speaking of which, Chu Mu had pretty much used all of his technique. The only technique he hadn't used was the Flying Heaven Imperial Sword technique. However, the Flying Heaven Imperial Sword technique wasn't very powerful. At most, it could be used as a distraction. However, when used against an opponent of Gulwankong's level, even the distraction wouldn't be of much use. Other than the void-shattering force field, there was another new inheritance of the void-shattering secret manual. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time, so he couldn't comprehend it. Naturally, he couldn't use it in a battle. Everyone's curiosity was piqued by Gulwankong's words. They all stared at Gulwankong to see what other moves he had. Apart from cultivation, I have also created a unique martial art. However, I haven't been able to find a suitable opponent. Now, Brother Chu, please have a look at it. Gulwankong's words caused a great shock. Created a unique martial art. Created a unique martial art again. Qin Aoxian's self-created ultimate skill caused a great shock. When the ultimate skill was unleashed, the flying deity Heaven Slashing Sword was even more shocking. Its power was peerless, and it was beautiful. Celestial music filled the air, and it even made people feel like they were willing to die under the flying deity Heaven Slashing Sword. However, such a talented Qin Aoxian was defeated by Gulwankong in the end. Then, how shocking would the martial art created by the man who was more talented than Qin Aoxian, who was known to be unparalleled in the world, be? Everyone was looking forward to it. Brother Chu, this unique martial art of mine is called the Illusory Sky 9 technique. Take this. Gulwankong said indifferently. He was telling Chu Mu the name of his unique martial art. He was also telling Chu Mu that he was going to attack. Gulwankong spread his legs and squatted down. He raised his sword with his right hand. The sword hilt was close to the corner of his right eye. The sword was pointed forward in front of his eyes. The cold sword light was reflected in his eyes. It made his eyes look sharper and sharper. His left hand's sword finger was placed on the tip of the sword. With a boom, an extremely powerful aura burst out from Gulwankong's body like a raging storm. An invisible aura shot up to the sky like a sword, as if it was going to pierce through the sky. That aura was like an invisible flame. It wrapped around Gulwankong's body. It was rising and burning endlessly. Then, a powerful spatial rule power was released. Strands of silver light swam around his body and merged with the invisible flame aura. It was like smoke. In a trance, Gulwankong's footsteps or his body swayed slightly. In short, it gave people the feeling that they were hallucinating. Gulwankong's body swayed rapidly. Countless shadows overlapped each other, causing people to be dazzled and their minds to be disturbed. Most of the geniuses felt dizzy. Their chests were tight and they almost vomited. They didn't dare to look at Gulwankong directly. Only the top 10 monstrous geniuses dared to look at him directly. Chu Mu was extremely surprised. He felt that his mind was being disturbed, and his mental world was fluctuating. He had a feeling of dizziness. Fortunately, his soul was powerful, his mental strength was powerful, and his willpower was firm. Although he was affected, he wasn't shaken. His two eyes slightly narrowed, and a luster flickered in his pupils. It was as sharp as a sword that could pierce through everything. At this moment, even Chu Mu couldn't tell if Gul Wankong was real or fake. Then, the countless shadows on Gul Wankong's body separated to the left and right. They gathered together and two people who looked exactly like Gul Wankong appeared. Their expressions were exactly the same and their swords were exactly the same too. The illusory Sky 9 strikes. I have defined it as a supreme technique. However, I have only created 3 strikes now. Gul Wankong's voice sounded. It was very strange. The 3 of them were talking at the same time. It was as if they were talking from the same person. The power of the 3 strikes is equivalent to a normal top-tier supreme technique. Gul Wankong explained the illusory Sky 9 strikes that he had created. However, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that the 3 Gul Luankongs were talking at the same time. It was very strange. Danger. Chu Mu felt a strong sense of danger. He felt that the 3 Gul Luankongs were all real. One Gul Wankong was enough to make him unable to gain the upper hand. If 3 Gul Luankongs attacked, the result would be obvious. Even so, Chu Mu wouldn't admit defeat. He wanted to experience the power of the illusory Sky 9 strikes that Gul Wankong had created. He wanted to know how powerful it was. There was no fear. There was only excitement. The hand that was holding the sword trembled slightly. Take this. The 3 Gul Luankongs spoke at the same time. One of them performed the chaotic space steps, one performed the chaotic space sword arts, and one performed the chaotic space force field. The 3 of them worked together and attacked Chu Mu. Chu Mu was under a lot of pressure. The one who performed the chaotic space steps would perform the spatial sword art. The one who performed the chaotic space sword arts would be extremely powerful. The one who performed the chaotic space force field would perform the wind sword art. The 3 of them performed the wind sword arts respectively and worked together seamlessly. They surrounded Chu Mu from 3 different angles. Even though Chu Mu had 2 swords in his hands, he couldn't defend himself. He was completely suppressed by Gul Wankong. This was also because Gul Wankong's illusory Sky 9 strikes wasn't mature enough. Otherwise, if the 3 Gul Luankongs performed the chaotic space force field, the chaotic space sword arts and the chaotic space steps at the same time, they would be able to defeat Chu Mu on the spot. Even though he was suppressed, Chu Mu was still fighting back with all his might. He performed all his sword arts without holding anything back. This made everyone even more surprised by the profundity and profoundness of his sword arts. Gul Wankong also admired Chu Mu. He was surprised that Chu Mu could still hold on under such pressure. The 3 great emperors put themselves in Chu Mu's shoes. If it were them back then, they wouldn't be able to fight against Gul Wankong, who used the illusory Sky 9 paths. However, Chu Mu relied on his profound and unpredictable sword techniques to forcefully hold on. However, the combined strength of the 3 Gul Luankongs was truly too powerful. Chu Mu was still slashed by the sword on his back. A wound appeared and blood gushed out like a fountain. He quickly controlled his muscles to close the wound. Chu Mu is injured. It seems like he can't hold on anymore. What a pity. With his strength, he could have defeated Qin Aoxian and become the 2nd seat of the martial saint. However, he chose to challenge Gul Wankong. He lost his last chance just like that. Everyone nodded. He's probably going to lose. At this moment, Chu Mu was also showing signs of losing. However, no one underestimated him. If it was Qin Aoxian, she wouldn't be able to fight against Gul Wankong either. Many thanks for Brother Gu's help. Next, I'll have to ask Brother Gu to evaluate what I just comprehended. Suddenly, just as Chu Mu showed signs of not being able to hold on, just as everyone, including Gul Wankong, thought that Chu Mu would definitely lose, Chu Mu let out a smile. Moreover, he said something that caused everyone to be confused. The last 2 words caused everyone's hearts to abruptly jump. They were extremely shocked because those two words were Sword Realm. Chapter 1295. Sword Realm. These two words represented terrifying power and terrifying talent. Swordsmen practiced swordsmanship, 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 sword intent, and sword realm. However, any swordsman who was successful in his cultivation could practice swordsmanship and comprehend sword intent. However, there were very few swordsmen who could master sword realm. Even sword saints of eternal realm didn't master sword realm. It could even be said that sword saints who had mastered sword realm were only a minority. But now, a swordsman who wasn't even 100 years old, and was only at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm, had said that he wanted his opponent to have a taste of sword realm. Could it be that he had really mastered sword realm? Gu Luankong and the other monstrous geniuses were shocked. Even a monstrous genius like him hadn't touched sword realm yet. Back then, when did you master sword realm? Great Emperor Bo Su asked after a moment of silence. I mastered sword realm when I was at the 8th sky of Nirvana realm, the middle-aged Great Emperor recalled and said. Me too, the female Great Emperor said. I mastered sword realm when I was at the 7th sky of Nirvana realm, Great Emperor Bo Su said. The earlier one grasped the sword domain, the more it meant that one had unparalleled talent in swordsmanship. Basically, when great emperors mastered sword realm, they were mostly at the Nirvana realm. However, they were at least at the 6th sky of Nirvana realm. Most of them were at the 7th to 9th sky of Nirvana realm. With Gu Luankong's talent, he might have mastered sword realm when he was at the 6th or 5th sky of Nirvana realm. Chu Mu's cultivation is only at the early stage of the 2nd sky of Nirvana realm. Maybe he's joking, the middle-aged Great Emperor said. The middle-aged martial emperor said. Soon after, his eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. His face was filled with astonishment and disbelief. Chu Mu had unleashed sword realm. The power of sword realm was formless and colorless. However, one could feel that with Chu Mu as the center, everything within a 1,000-meter radius was covered by sword realm. The sword domain was similar to a force field, but it was also different from a force field. Force fields mainly targeted the power of the laws of heaven and earth. Some of the more unique and powerful force fields could affect the mind or sword essence. Sword domain, on the other hand, did not target the laws, mind, or sword essence. It only weakened the opponent's speed and strength, thus affecting the opponent's strength. It weakened the opponent's strength and increased the user's strength and speed. Furthermore, within the sword domain, the owner of the sword domain would be able to clearly see everything that was happening within the sword domain. Any movement of the enemy would be clearly grasped by the owner. It was as if the owner could predict the enemy's movements, making it even more accurate to deal with them. As soon as Chu Mu released his sword domain, Gu Luankong immediately felt that his chaotic space force field was suppressed. It couldn't affect Chu Mu at all. The amplification of his spatial laws was also weakened. The powerful chaotic space force field almost lost its effect. Although Gu Luankong's chaotic space force field was only at the initial stage, his sword domain was too terrifying. Besides, Chu Mu's sword domain was also at the initial stage. The reason why he was able to release his sword domain at this moment was greatly related to the pressure brought by Gu Luankong. Chu Mu's sword skills had already reached the pinnacle. Furthermore, he had personally experienced the power of the sword domain. After that, Chu Mu would try to comprehend it whenever he had the time. However, he didn't make any progress. After the Azure Sky Illusory World and the Supreme Seat Challenge, he had personally witnessed the battles of many monstrous geniuses. He had displayed his sword skills many times, which had broadened his horizons, broadened his knowledge, and improved his sword skills. Now, he had gained the most from the battle with Gu Luankong. Furthermore, after Gu Luankong had displayed the illusory Sky 9 strikes, the 3 Gu Luankongs had besieged him, which had brought him unprecedented pressure. With pressure came motivation. Chu Mu's comprehension of the sword domain had unknowingly reached a critical point. Finally, he had made a breakthrough and successfully comprehended the sword domain. His sword domain was only at the initial stage. However, the initial stage of the sword domain had already displayed shocking power. The three Gu Luangkongs were all suppressed. They could clearly feel that their strength and speed were suppressed by a force. They couldn't break free. Chu Mu's feeling was different from Gu Luangkong's. He only felt that he could see everything within a 1,000-meter radius of the sword domain. Even if he didn't use his sword skills, he could sense everything clearly. He wouldn't miss any detail. It was a mysterious feeling that couldn't be described with words. It was a magical power that was above the power of seeing, listening, and touching the sword. Without saying a word, Gu Luangkong launched another attack. However, this time, Chu Mu could completely grasp the trajectory of the three Gu Luangkong's attack. Furthermore, he could vaguely predict the trajectory of the next attack. This feeling surprised Chu Mu. However, he soon got used to it and was immersed in it. As soon as he launched his counterattack, Chu Mu felt that his strength and speed had increased. Although it wasn't much, it was obvious that his strength had increased. On the other hand, Gu Luangkong's strength and speed had been suppressed a little. Under this situation, Chu Mu was able to turn the tables and fight fiercely with the three Gu Luangkongs. The attacks of the three Gu Luangkongs were completely under Chu Mu's control. However, Chu Mu's counterattacks were always unexpected. Gu Luangkong had no choice but to use his full strength to deal with them. The battle between Chu Mu and Gu Luangkong was completely out of everyone's expectations. Originally, they thought that it was about time for Gu Luangkong to use the illusory Void Nine Paths. However, they didn't expect Gu Luangkong to create such a powerful technique. At this point, they also thought that it was about time for the battle to end. However, Chu Mu's tenacity exceeded everyone's expectations. Under the attacks of the three Gu Luangkongs, he managed to hold on even though he was at a disadvantage. At the last moment, just when everyone thought that Chu Mu was going to lose, the situation took a huge turn. Chu Mu actually used the Sword Realm. Once the Sword Realm was used, the two of them started to fight. Chu Mu turned the tables and fought fiercely with Gu Luangkong. They were evenly matched and it was difficult to determine the victor. Level 5 sword power was completely unleashed. It was extremely sharp. Every time they collided, it caused people to tremble. The illusory Void Nine Paths consumed a lot of energy. The Sword Realm also consumed a lot of energy. It couldn't be maintained for long. After a fierce battle, Gu Luangkong's two figures shook and shattered. They couldn't hold on anymore. Chu Mu's Sword Realm also collapsed. Chu Mu's Divine Wilderness sword energy had been used up in his dantian. His body's strength was also greatly depleted. Gu Luangkong's Divine Wilderness sword energy was also almost depleted. Gu Luangkong didn't stop. Chu Mu didn't stop either. They continued to fight. His muscles trembled as he channeled energy into his body. He held two swords in his hands. The swords vibrated at a frequency that couldn't be captured by the naked eye. He attacked Gu Luangkong again and again. Gu Luangkong's body wasn't weak. However, he didn't cultivate his body. It was difficult for him to fight against Chu Mu when his Divine Wilderness sword energy was almost depleted. Sword after sword, every sword was fast and ferocious. Gu Luangkong was forced to retreat continuously. Even though he had mastered many techniques, he couldn't use them because he didn't have enough Divine Wilderness sword energy. He is actually suppressing Gu Luangkong. Unbelievable! Everyone was dumbfounded. Sword light produced countless illusions. Every sword was blazing fiercely. It was like a thunderbolt striking the sky. It was like a volcano erupting. However, under such a violent sword skill, there was a trace of flexibility. Not only did it not weaken the power of the sword skill, it even strengthened it to a certain extent. The connection between every sword was more perfect and there were no flaws. When his sword technique reached the pinnacle and broke through the limit, Chu Mu comprehended sword domain. The comprehension and mastery of sword domain fed back to Chu Mu, raising his sword technique attainments and indirectly raising his sword technique. Gulwankong gritted his teeth. He dodged and blocked again and again. He endured Chu Mu's attacks. It wasn't that he didn't want to fight back. It was that he didn't have the ability to fight back. At this stage of the battle, unless he consumed some pills or used some secret treasure, he could only do so. However, in this kind of battle, if he used pills or secret treasures, it would lose its original meaning. The two swords slashed downwards. That sword light was like the first flash of lightning that had cut through the darkness. It seemed like it was going to split the sky and the earth. Gulwankong dodged one sword attack and blocked the other. A huge shockwave landed, and the sword in Gulwankong's hand started to shake intensely. The shockwave hit his palm and numbed his palm. His palm started to crack and bleed. Even so, Gulwankong still held his sword tightly. The shoulder strike was unstoppable. It was like a sharp sword piercing through. Every part of Chu Mu's body seemed to be able to turn into a sword. With a cracking sound, Gulwankong's sternum was shattered. His body shook and he groaned. Blood came out from the corner of his mouth. Chu Mu didn't show any mercy. He took a step forward and slashed down again. It broke through Gulwankong's defense and sent him flying dozens of meters away. The two swords slashed down. Two streaks of sword chi were like crescent moons. They crossed each other and slashed towards Gulwankong. They were bright and sharp. Nothing could stop them. Gulwankong, who was sent flying, landed on the ground. Before he could stabilize himself, he saw the two streaks of sword chi flying towards him. He quickly tried to dodge them. Although he was in a mess, he still managed to dodge them. It was unbelievable. Chu Mu didn't attack again. He didn't use his sword energy. Instead, he used his physical strength and shockwave energy to create sword chi. He used up a lot of his energy. Gulwankong panted heavily. At this stage of the battle, both of them were about to be exhausted. However, the two of them were smiling to their heart's content. "I don't have any energy left. What about you?" Gulwankong said after letting out a breath. "One more thing," Chu Mu said honestly. "You win." Gulwankong admitted defeat. No one had expected that the final outcome would be like this. Even the unparalleled Gulwankong lost. Gulwankong is indeed unparalleled. However, Chu Mu's sword skills are unparalleled. Great Emperor Bosu said. He was only at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. It had never happened before. Even in the era of gods, it had never happened before. As far as they knew, there was only one person who had comprehended the sword realm at the fourth sky of Nirvana realm. Chapter 1296. Unparalleled Chaotic Space. Chu Mu's Supremacy. These two sentences were more powerful than anything else when they came from the mouth of an emperor. They would definitely sweep across the four major star regions of the human race. This is too exciting. I never thought that I would be able to witness such a battle. This is completely unexpected. I always thought that the first seat would be taken by Gulwankong. I never thought that it would be Chu Mu in the end. After Gulwankong admitted defeat, the first seat no longer belonged to him. It became Chu Mu's seat. He landed on the fourth seat. Chu Mu appeared on the first throne. Behind the enormous throne was a starry sky. When Chu Mu sat on it, the starry sky abruptly changed. Clusters of stars were densely packed, and the starlight was resplendent. The star atlas was distributed and rotated. Countless starlight streaked across the sky like meteors, like a tide. The background of the starry sky throne was a vast starry sky. However, it would change depending on the person. Chu Mu cultivated the astral calamity cultivation technique, causing the background of the starry sky throne to be even brighter. There were even more strange phenomena that appeared, dazzling the eyes of the spectators. As soon as Chu Mu sat on the starry sky throne, he was surrounded by a vast energy. His divine wilderness sword energy, physique and spiritual sense were recovering at an unimaginable speed. In just 3 breaths' time, Chu Mu's cultivation strength had recovered to its peak. Because it was too fast, he felt that it was unreal. After all his strength had recovered to its peak, under the influence of the vast energy, his vision and hearing became clearer. His thoughts became clearer and his speed of circulation became faster. His comprehension ability was also strengthened by a few folds. For Chu Mu, who had a terrifying comprehension ability, the increase of a few folds was very impressive. It caused his comprehension ability to rise to a new level. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu abandoned all distracting thoughts and focused on comprehending the intense battle with Gu Luankong. He had the upper hand, he had been suppressed, he had been constantly improving himself through the battle. Chu Mu's comprehension of the void-shattering force field had deepened, and his attainments in swordsmanship had increased. Finally, he had comprehended the sword domain. Time and time again, he had gained new insights and harvests, causing Chu Mu's strength to rise by leaps and bounds. Originally, it was impossible for him to defeat Gu Luankong. However, because of his amazing power of understanding and the ability to improve himself in battle, his strength kept increasing. His body was also very tenacious. As long as he wasn't defeated in a short period of time, he would be able to recover quickly and deal with Gu Luankong. In the end, Gu Luankong was exhausted, and Chu Mu was almost completely drained. Only then did Gu Luankong admit defeat. It was an extremely difficult battle. Although Chu Mu had defeated Gu Luankong and obtained the first seat, the challenge for the seats was not over yet. It was now Yang Zhantian's turn. Yang Zhantian's battle intent soared to the sky. Without hesitation, he chose to challenge Chu Mu. He wasn't Gu Luankong's opponent. After watching the battle between Chu Mu and Gu Luankong, he also knew that he wasn't Chu Mu's opponent. However, the 100 Battles lineage cultivated the heaven fighting technique. They fought against the heavens and the earth, and their battle intent was endless. No matter who the opponent was, they wouldn't be afraid and would fight to the end. The stronger the opponent, the more their battle intent would be stimulated. The more they could train the battling heaven method and their battle intent. Yang Zhantian wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Chu Mu wasn't surprised at all. Chu Mu's expression slightly changed. Personally experiencing Yang Zhantian's battle intent made him feel his blood boiling, giving him an urge to fight. Yang Zhantian's battle intent was like a giant sword soaring into the sky. Without saying anything, Yang Zhantian unleashed all of his power. His sword was like a falling comet. His battle intent soared to the sky. The whistling sound was like endless waves. Sword domain! With a shout, Chu Mu's eyes lit up. He released his sword domain, covering an area of 1,000 meters. Yang Zhantian was enveloped by the sword domain. He instantly felt his strength and speed weaken. He wasn't even as strong as Gu Luankong. Since it was Chu Mu's second time using the sword domain, he was more familiar with it. Therefore, Yang Zhantian's speed and strength were weakened more than Gu Luankong's. On the other hand, Chu Mu's strength increased a lot. Under this situation, even though Yang Zhantian's fighting spirit was soaring to the heavens, he still felt that his hands and feet were tied. He was extremely sullen. Every sword attack seemed to be powerful, but it felt as if it wasn't powerful enough and was always dodged by Chu Mu. On the other hand, Chu Mu's counterattacks were plain and ordinary, yet they were always able to hit his weak points. Moreover, it was as if Chu Mu knew his next move, causing him to feel flustered. Yang Zhantian felt very aggrieved. However, he couldn't get rid of the suppression of the sword domain. This feeling of helplessness made him want to explode, but he couldn't. His face looked very ugly. Chu Mu didn't care about Yang Zhantian's feelings. He was using Yang Zhantian to train his sword domain. I admit defeat. Yang Zhantian couldn't take it anymore. He yelled. He was too aggrieved. He was being bullied. As soon as Yang Zhantian admitted defeat, Chu Mu naturally couldn't continue. He could only withdraw his sword domain regretfully. After returning to the Starry Sky Supreme Seat, the power he used was completely recovered in a short time. Yang Zhantian lost. The Starry Sky Supreme Seat didn't change. It was the second Starry Sky Supreme Seat's turn. Everyone stared at Qin Aoxian. They wanted to see if she would give up or challenge Chu Mu. After all, she could only challenge Chu Mu. As expected, Qin Aoxian didn't give up. She challenged Chu Mu. Qin Aoxian is probably not Chu Mu's opponent. Yeah, the sword domain is too powerful. I want to see the sword domain, Qin Aoxian said directly. Said Qin Aoxian straightforwardly. As soon as she finished speaking, she cast Flying Immortal Force Field and used Flying Immortal Sword Technique and Flying Immortal Dance to attack Chu Mu. Chu Mu released Sword Domain and enveloped Qin Aoxian. Qin Aoxian immediately felt her body sink. Her strength and speed were clearly weakened by the suppression. The Flying Immortal Dance and Flying Immortal Sword Technique she used felt restrained, like an imprisoned true dragon. She felt powerless as if she wanted to but did not have enough strength. Even if the Flying Immortal Sword Technique was incomparably exquisite, much more exquisite than the Chaotic Void Sword Technique, it still couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. This was because Chu Mu knew everything within the sword domain like the back of his hand. The trajectory of the Flying Immortal Sword Technique's sword was clearly seen through by him due to the power of the sword domain, allowing him to react in advance. The Chaotic Void Sword Technique was capable of disrupting space, and it was capable of shuttling through space. It was capable of launching attacks from all directions. On the other hand, the Flying Immortal Sword Technique was inferior to the Chaotic Void Sword Technique in terms of lethality. However, it was superior in terms of subtlety. This was a rare opportunity. Chu Mu didn't defeat Qin Aoxian directly. Instead, he pressured her into using the Flying Fairy Sword Technique to the extreme. All of the intricacies were shown to Chu Mu. Qin Aoxian didn't know that Chu Mu had seen through all of the intricacies of her Flying Fairy Sword Technique. Chu Mu didn't have the cultivation method of the Flying Fairy Sword Technique, so he couldn't cultivate it. However, after seeing through the intricacies, he could still counterattack through the flaws of the Flying Fairy Sword Technique even without using the sword domain. Qin Aoxian knew that she couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. However, she wanted to experience the sword domain for herself. Chu Mu's sword domain had just been formed. It was at the entry level. It was the lowest level of the sword domain. Experiencing it for herself would be more intuitive. Both Qin Aoxian and Yang Zhantian had the same idea. It would help them comprehend the sword domain faster in the future. It would be a great help. In fact, if they had the chance, all of the geniuses wanted to experience it for themselves. However, they didn't have the chance now. They could only watch from the side and try their best to feel it. The Flying Fairy Sword Technique and Flying Fairy Dance couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. Qin Aoxian held the Flying Fairy Sword and floated into the sky. White light shone brightly as if a fairy was circling around. She threw the Flying Fairy Sword up. Celestial music rang out. Streaks of white sword light flashed from the Flying Fairy Sword and filled the sky. The celestial music rang out. It made people feel like they had entered a fairyland. However, each streak of white sword light radiated with shocking sharpness. It made people tremble as if they were being cut apart. Even their souls were about to be shattered. Self-created unique skill, Flying Fairy Sky Slashing Sword. Chu Mu looked interested. One day, he would create his own unique skill. Therefore, it was a good experience to experience someone else's unique skill. Streaks of white sword light slashed down. Each streak seemed to be able to cut open the sky. However, they couldn't cut through Chu Mu's sword domain. Within the sword domain, the speed and power of the white sword light were reduced. Chu Mu could feel the trajectory of each streak of sky-slashing sword light. The sky-slashing sword light was like a storm. It wanted to cut the sky and the earth into pieces. All living things in the sky and the earth were reduced to ashes. Chu Mu moved his body. Each time, he was able to dodge the sky-slashing sword light at the right time. After a while, the sky-slashing sword light hit nothing. However, none of them hit Chu Mu. This result was very shocking. Before Chu Mu could fight back, Qin Aoxian admitted defeat. The sword domain was just too powerful. Of course, if Gu Luankong or Qin Aoxian reached the fourth sky of the Nirvana realm, they could resist the suppression of the sword domain with their powerful cultivation. Unless Chu Mu's cultivation increased or the sword domain deepened. Although the sword domain was powerful, it had its limits. The last challenge was Gu Luankong's. In the previous 2 rounds, Gu Luankong didn't have the chance to challenge anyone because he was in the first seat. However, it was different now. Gu Luankong wasn't a saint. He wasn't someone without desires. He wasn't willing to be in the 4th seat. However, he knew that even if he fought with Chu Mu again, he wouldn't be able to defeat Chu Mu. Gu Luankong looked at Qin Aoxian. There was nothing strange about challenging Qin Aoxian. Even if he couldn't get the 1st place, he had to get the 2nd place. After all, the difference between the 2nd place and the 4th place was huge. Qin Aoxian tried her best in the battle against Gu Luankong. However, she was still defeated by Gu Luankong's sword. Gu Luankong's illusory Sky 9 Paths unique skill was very powerful. It suppressed Qin Aoxian. Now, the Heaven Youth List competition was over. In the end, Chu Mu was in the 1st place. Gu Luankong was in the 2nd place. Yang Zhantian was in the 3rd place. Qin Aoxian was in the 4th place. Su Yueshi was in the 5th place. Bai Yu was in the 6th place. Lian Hongyun was in the 7th place.